An accident is an event from which no one is immune. At any moment, something unexpected can occur that completely changes the usual course of events. However, not everyone is able to accept the death of a loved one, and sometimes an accident turns into a catalyst for even more bloodshed. On the evening of July 1, 2016, Roberta Smargiassi was heading to her mother's house. At that time, she was 33 years old. She had been handling her business all Friday and was planning to visit her relatives to share some good news. Roberta wanted to prepare a festive dinner to gather all her relatives later. She was excited and hurried to reach her parents' house as soon as possible, using her scooter. Before leaving, Roberta called her mother to say she would be arriving soon. Unfortunately, she was not destined to reach her loved ones. Roberta was riding her scooter along the road when she moved through the green light. In the other lane, a young man named Italo DeLisa was driving a Fiat Punto. He was only 21 years old. Despite the fact that the traffic light was red for him, he ignored it and continued driving. He did not notice the scooter that Roberta was riding. A collision occurred. After the impact, she crashed into the traffic light and fell onto the asphalt. The impact was quite strong, and she was thrown onto the sidewalk. Roberta sustained very serious injuries. Italo was confused but did not run away from the scene. He tried to provide first aid to Roberta. Witnesses immediately called the emergency services. When the medics arrived, they found the victim lying on the sidewalk with her head badly injured. Wounded, Roberta was barely clinging to life. They attempted to help her on the scene, but without specialized equipment, she would definitely not have survived. Therefore, she was urgently loaded into an ambulance and sent to the hospital in Vasto, Italy. The medics fought for her life on the way to the medical center. Upon arrival, Roberta was immediately taken to the surgical room for emergency surgery. Unfortunately, they were unable to save her, as her injuries were too severe. The cause of death was a craniocerebral injury due to her head hitting the pavement. Italo was also taken to the medical center. It turned out that he only sustained minor abrasions. There was no one else in his car. After treating his abrasions, Italo underwent testing for alcohol and prohibited substances in his blood. He did not refuse the examination and claimed he had not used anything. Italo expressed regret over what had happened, explaining that he had been distracted, accidentally ignored a red traffic light, and had not noticed Roberta on her small scooter. A toxicological examination confirmed that he was telling the truth. No alcohol or illegal substances were found in his blood. He behaved appropriately, reasoned calmly, was aware of the situation, and expressed remorse for what had transpired. When he was informed that the victim of the accident did not survive the collision, he burst into tears. Italo did not attempt to deny his guilt but continued to assert that it was all the result of a coincidence. Naturally, this provided little consolation for Roberta's loved ones. Her mother had been expecting to welcome her daughter home, but Roberta never arrived. She tried to call her daughter, but was unable to reach her. Eventually, she turned to Roberta's husband, who informed her about the accident. When the family received the tragic news, everyone was in shock. They blamed her death on the young man who had been inattentive behind the wheel. But none of this could bring Roberta back. 9 months before the tragedy, Roberta Smargiassi married a man named Fabio Di Lello, who was the love of her life. At the time of the fatal accident, Fabio was also 34 years old. They had known each other for many years before deciding to tie the knot. Fabio was a sporty and quite popular man, a well-known footballer who demonstrated excellent results in amateur tournaments. In 2015, he debuted in Serie D as a reserve player, and the entire family, including Roberta, was very proud of him. When they first met, Roberta worked in her father-in-law's bakery, as he owned one of the most popular bakeries in the city. After meeting Fabio, they began to build their relationship. Everyone saw their sincere love and believed that their marriage would be the best example of genuine feelings. Therefore, the tragic death of Roberta was a real blow for both families. Once all the paperwork was completed, funeral preparations began on July 3, 2016. The body was taken to the church, which was overflowing with the victim's family and friends. There were so many people that they couldn't all fit inside the building. Most of them crowded outside, waiting to say goodbye to the victim of the tragedy. Roberta's funeral was conducted by the priest who had married them on October 3, 2015. At that moment, of course, no one suspected that 9 months later the woman would be back here, but this time to be buried. This accident turned Fabio's life upside down. It was obvious from the start that he was having a hard time coping with this loss. After saying goodbye to Roberta, the families did not want to accept that Roberta had been taken from them by chance, and now they were demanding retribution against her killer. The most embittered of all was Fabio. He insisted that Italo had not accidentally hit his wife, so he demanded a thorough investigation in the hope of obtaining the maximum possible punishment for him. As part of the investigation, the Carabinieri spoke to witnesses. However, no one noticed inadequate behavior or any recklessness on the road. The driver calmly maneuvered his car and did not disturb anyone. Some witnesses even claimed not to have seen Roberta, arguing that she was moving on a small scooter, which was difficult to spot. The police had footage from surveillance cameras located in 3 places at the intersection, so the moment of the accident was recorded from different angles. All the recordings were carefully analyzed. In addition, they collected footage of both participants in the accident driving before the collision. Both behaved calmly on the road and followed the rules and speed limits, at least until Italo ran a red light. Fabio still wouldn't accept this. He insisted that Italo had broken the rules and was probably under the influence of illegal substances. He completely ignored the toxicology results, which showed that everyone involved in the accident was sober. In his anger, he rallied his entire family against Italo. However, this was not difficult, considering how much everyone loved Roberta. Under Italian law, as in many other countries, an accident was punished far less severely than murder, and serious grounds were needed to classify Roberta's death as murder. Law enforcement tried to build a case, but aside from the ignored red traffic light, there was no evidence to establish the fact of murder. All of this made Fabio even angrier. On July 15, 2016, he initiated a memorial procession in honor of his deceased wife, which dozens of concerned individuals attended. He demanded that the perpetrator be brought to justice and led a torchlight procession despite the pouring rain. Hundreds of people gathered to march. They walked through the streets of Vasto, chanting slogans against the killer. Fabio himself did not mince words. Most of the participants did not want to forget Roberta and hoped to honor her memory and achieve justice for the fatal accident. However, Fabio's overly aggressive and defiant behavior puzzled many. There was something more disturbing than grief in the air. It was the real hatred that Fabio felt for Italo. Even before this memorable march, accusations and very harsh statements about Italo began to surface on social media. Italo's family perceived the dissemination of discrediting information as inappropriate. They defended Italo, insisting that in life he was completely different from how Fabio tried to portray him. They argued that Italo made a fatal mistake but did so unintentionally and was not a murderer, according to his family. All of this even attracted the attention of the prosecutor investigating Roberta's death. The aggressive Fabio was only calmed by the threat of being accused of stalking. Although he became taciturn and stopped publicly confronting Italo, he did not cease inciting those around him against Italo in daily life. Initially, this had a particularly strong impact on the families of Roberta and Fabio. At Fabio's initiative, a large poster with Roberta's image appeared on her grave, and a bench was installed at the scene of the accident, serving as a memorial. At first, dozens of relatives and friends visited the grave to honor the memory of her. Almost everyone encountered Fabio, regardless of the time they came. He could be found at the grave at any hour of the day. While others managed to contain their pain of loss, the grief-stricken husband began to behave more and more strangely. He quit his job and spent whole days at the grave of his deceased wife. In the first few days after the funeral, he came there to pray. He stayed for a couple of hours but then left. However, by the end of the first week, he was spending long hours there, then he began to stay for the entire day. Fabio even brought food with him, having lunch and dinner near the grave. His behavior began to resemble insanity. He could not come to terms with the loss of his beloved wife. He arrived as soon as the cemetery gates opened and left only before they closed. The situation worsened. Several times, he was spotted when the cemetery was already closing. At first, Fabio was stopped by the locked gates, but he began to climb over the wall. Local workers noticed that Fabio began spending the night on his wife's grave. It got to the point where he spent almost the entire day at the cemetery and refused to leave. When Fabio's relatives asked him about this, he stated that his wife's grave was the only place where he felt a connection and closeness to his late wife, as well as a semblance of peace. The rest of the time, he could not find peace, as the thought of the injustice of her death troubled him incessantly. He flatly refused to accept that Roberta was no longer alive. Relatives tried to support him, but Fabio became increasingly irritable, unpredictable. It was enough to merely mention Roberta's name, and he would explode in anger and behave aggressively. He claimed that money had not helped save Roberta, and therefore it was useless. Fabio's relatives began to fear that his mental state had deteriorated. The only consolation for him was the ongoing investigation into the accident. Fabio looked forward to the person responsible being sent to prison for a long time. That is why the events that followed unsettled him even more. A few days before Christmas, Italo's lawyer managed to find mitigating circumstances in the case. Firstly, Italo was doing volunteer work and was so socially active in this area that his efforts proved to be very beneficial. Several people spoke highly of him, stating that he had a very positive impact on their lives. Secondly, Italo had always dreamed of becoming a firefighter and serving the community. He also had no other misdemeanors, and there was no talk of a criminal record. He had not even violated traffic rules before. In addition, a thorough analysis of the video footage from the intersection showed that Roberta herself did not follow the rules. The footage revealed that she was driving without a helmet, and Italo's car was not exceeding the speed limit. He was respecting the limit despite ignoring the red traffic light. It was believed that if she had taken care of her safety and worn a helmet, the severe head injury could have been avoided, and she might have survived the collision. Fabio attended the preliminary hearing for Roberta's death hoping for justice. When he heard Italo's defense regarding mitigating circumstances, he exploded in a fit of uncontrollable rage. Several family members had to hold him back, fearing that Fabio might attack Italo. The judge took into account the mitigating circumstances presented by the defense. The lawyer's arguments sounded quite convincing, and even Roberta's relatives were unaware that she had neglected to wear a helmet. In the eyes of others, the defendant no longer appeared to be the cruel man Fabio had painted him to be. But not to Fabio. He continued to regard Italo as a monster deserving the harshest punishment. A hearing was scheduled after which everyone dispersed. Italo remained free, at least until the trial's conclusion. As Fabio left the courtroom, he glared at Italo with long, piercing hatred. After that Christmas, Fabio's relatives noticed that his grief had reached its peak. He spent several days in front of his beloved's grave, kneeling and praying almost the entire time. This time, he did not even bring food with him, which looked very alarming. When asked about food, he chuckled, saying that he did not even feel hungry. Everyone was very concerned about Fabio's mental state, but any suggestions and attempts to send him to a doctor for help ended in conflict. Roberta's mother, father, brother, and other relatives tried several times to start a conversation about going to a psychiatrist for a consultation, but to no avail. The only thing he could think about, besides his wife, was the inability of law enforcement agencies to punish the insidious criminal Italo. The main hearing was scheduled for February 21, 2017. However, after hearing Italo's lawyer's defense and the judge's reaction, Fabio didn't have much hope for a harsh sentence. Hatred had consumed him completely. He craved not just justice, but also retribution. Judging by conversations with his loved ones, he had stopped believing in justice. By the end of 2016, he had become especially withdrawn and had almost no contact with his family. If he was not at his wife's grave, he would sit in his room, locked in, and eat almost nothing. Everyone was worried about his health, completely overlooking some important circumstances. Fabio had received a firearms license 10 years before these events, and in the following years, he regularly visited the shooting range to practice shooting. What had long been a simple hobby now seemed like the only right way out. Even worse, in September 2016, Fabio legally acquired a 9mm pistol, as he had all the necessary documents and the appropriate level of training. By the end of December 2016, Fabio's parents noticed that he had radically changed the design of his social media page. He posted gloomy updates with sad thoughts and also shared a scene from the film Gladiator, where the main character returns from the war to find that his entire family has been killed. Friends assumed this was how he was processing the bitterness of his loss and found his reflection in the movie's hero. In fact, it wasn't just his sadness and desire for justice that drove him, he was now consumed by a thirst for revenge. He felt that law enforcement was not on the side of good but was instead supporting the bad guy. The slowness and inefficiency of the justice system felt like a mockery of Roberta's death. Those close to him did not believe that the once good-natured Fabio could take up arms, and the photo from the film reflected his desire for lynching. After that, he made several more posts on his page. All of them were about the search for justice, but he did not hint at or indicate what he was planning to do. These were rather abstract musings, questions that concealed something much more disturbing. On February 1, 2017, Italo went to a cafe located in Vasto, Abruzzo. He visited this place periodically to unwind, and recently he had been going there more often for obvious reasons. Italo spent a lot of time talking with friends and acquaintances. He was very upset by the tragedy involving Roberta. He repeatedly stated that he was not going to run from justice, so he was ready to accept any court decision. Now, Italo found himself at the cafe again in search of support. The upcoming hearing was set to take place in 3 weeks. The only thing that distinguished his visit to the cafe from any other day was that he ran into Fabio at the entrance. This meeting seemed strange, as Italo knew that Fabio lived on the other side of the city and that they had not crossed paths before here. They exchanged a few short phrases. Suddenly, Fabio pulled out his 9mm pistol. He caught Italo talking on his cell phone, and Italo's father was on the other end of the line. The first bullet hit Italo in the stomach, the second in the leg, and the third in the neck. He immediately fell, bleeding. His father heard his son take his last breath through the phone. The wound to the neck was fatal, the artery had been severed. Other cafe patrons rushed to the noise. Fabio immediately got into his car and fled the scene. When paramedics arrived at the cafe, they pronounced Italo dead. The Carabinieri quickly interviewed witnesses, and thanks to their statements, the shooter was soon identified. They arrived at Fabio's family home, where his relatives told them where he could be found. The Carabinieri went to Roberta's grave, expecting to find Fabio there. It was assumed that he would most likely end one's own life. A semi-automatic pistol was found in a plastic bag on the gravestone. Ballistics tests were later conducted, confirming that it was this gun that was used to shoot Italo. His father then made an official statement, convincing the public that Roberta's death was a tragic accident. Italo's father knew that his son would never intentionally harm anyone. He pointed out that Italo wouldn't even drive after drinking a beer. In his father's opinion, Italo should not have to pay for the tragic circumstances with his life, especially since Roberta herself did not take adequate care of her own safety. A few hours after the murder, Fabio was found. Before turning himself in, he called a friend, confessed that he had shot his wife's killer and was going to the cemetery to say goodbye to Roberta. At that time, he revealed why he had been so upset by his wife's death. The evening she went to visit her parents, Roberta was planning to cook a treat and share the good news that she had learned she was pregnant. Roberta was expecting a child with Fabio, and the pregnancy was still in its early stages. Until that moment, Fabio was the only one who knew about it, and he understood the full scale of the tragedy. In addition to the death of his wife in a traffic accident, he lost his child, which was a double blow for Fabio. After Italo's death, his father continued to clear his son's name from the negativity directed at him on the internet and in life. He needed to present all these arguments at the trial so that his son would not receive the same harsh punishment as real criminals who acted with malicious intent. The father believed that Fabio had acted unfairly towards his son. Fabio had created an atmosphere of hatred against Italo to such an extent that the whole country branded him as an Italian killer. In reality, according to Italo's father, he was a victim of circumstances. Italo was not evil. He took Roberta's death very hard and often shared his feelings with his father, stating that the only thing he would like to correct in his life was running a red light. Italo's father created a sort of memorial in front of the cafe where his son was shot, placing Italo's photo and candles there, visiting every day to honor his memory. Public opinion was divided on the matter. Some supported Roberta's husband, believing that Fabio had done the right thing by seeking revenge on the offender who took his wife and child. Others felt that Fabio had acted too harshly and should have waited for the court's decision. Italo would certainly have received a fair verdict. In fact, after Italo's murder, Fabio's parents expressed their condolences to his family. They revealed that they had sought medical assistance 2 days before the crime when Fabio's unpredictable behavior reached its limits. They realized that he needed qualified psychiatric help, even if it meant he would have to be committed. They noticed that his behavior was completely out of control, leading them to fear for his mental health and request his hospitalization. Unfortunately, bureaucratic obstacles and the inertia of the system prevented this from happening in time. If Fabio's parents' appeal had been successful and he had been hospitalized immediately, perhaps a second tragedy could have been avoided. On February 4, 2017, Italo's coffin was present at the Vasto Church. The funeral was attended by numerous friends and family members. The ceremony was led by the same priest who had previously addressed Roberta's unexpected passing. Aware of the tragic events, he encouraged everyone present to act with kindness and respect towards one another. He urged attendees to refrain from expressing hatred, especially on social media. During this challenging time, the priest hoped to foster unity and put an end to further violence. Rather than a hearing about Roberta's death, which was stopped because the accused had died, Fabio found himself in court facing a charge of first-degree murder. His lawyer tried to argue that Fabio had not planned the crime and sought to lessen his responsibility due to his serious mental health problems. This defense could have helped him avoid a life sentence. However, the prosecutor provided strong evidence against this claim. On March 24, 2017, the court convicted Fabio Di Lello and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. The lawyer highlighted the significant decline in the client's mental health following the death of his cherished wife. He struggled to handle her loss, and timely support was lacking. The lawyer submitted an appeal, leading to further evaluations. On July 10, 2018, the appellate court shortened the prison sentence to 20 years, citing a diagnosis of an acute mental disorder for Fabio during the attack. However, the prosecution was dissatisfied with this ruling and requested that the original 30-year sentence be reinstated. On November 13, 2019, the Court of Cassation dismissed the appeals. Consequently, the 20-year prison sentence became official and final. Initially, Fabio faced significant challenges during his imprisonment. He received regular support from a psychiatrist and a priest because of his high risk of ending one's own life. Over time, however, he began to improve and the risk diminished. Fabio remains in prison and is scheduled for release in 2037. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Cassidy Goodson. Cassidy Goodson's early years were spent in a loving family in a quiet area of the small town of Lakeland, Florida, USA, which has a population of about 100,000 people. Those who knew her described her as a girl with great potential who was outgoing and successful in softball. Both of her parents worked hard for the good of the family. Their first priority was always to provide for their children. Cassidy had a sister and a brother, with whom she had quite close relationships. In her teens, Cassidy had no problems with her parents or the law. She did not use illegal substances, did not smoke, was athletic, and excelled academically. Cassidy helped her mother with housework, and every Sunday, she went with her family to church. Everyone who knew she believed that she had a great future. She was eager to study and planned to pursue a career. However, in the spring of 2012, significant changes occurred in the life of the 14-year-old teenager. Her brother and sister noticed that Cassidy began to behave differently than usual. First of all, she gained weight. However, her mother believed that this could be associated with hormonal changes during adolescence. The girl's clothing preferences changed as well. It seemed that Cassidy was very self-conscious about what was happening, so she began to wear baggy clothes that hid her figure. Cassidy did not even change clothes with her classmates before physical education. Against this backdrop, some people quickly began to suspect that she was pregnant, and rumors about this started to circulate at school. She did not admit it to her sister or best friends. In fact, she found herself in a delicate situation. She was afraid of her family's reaction. She felt great anxiety and decided to hide her pregnancy from her parents, as well as from everyone around her. Gradually, her belly began to grow. Cassidy gained weight but continued to stubbornly wear the same pants to avoid detection. Around the house, she wrapped herself in a blanket. The once smiling and sociable schoolgirl now spent most of her time alone in her room, hardly communicating with anyone. She stopped going to church to avoid catching the eye of acquaintances. Cassidy's sister, as well as her mother, Teresa, noticed strange changes in her behavior. Teresa tried to discuss the possibility of pregnancy with her daughter. Cassidy immediately rejected such assumptions. Her mother insisted that she take a pregnancy test to eliminate any doubts, but deep down, she did not think that Cassidy could keep something like this a secret. Teresa bought several tests, and Cassidy agreed to take them. Teresa trusted her daughter, so she did not attend the test with her. This proved to be very convenient for Cassidy, as she easily managed to deceive everyone, proving that she was not pregnant. Teresa's trust became a fatal mistake. She talked to her daughter about this topic, but Cassidy insisted that she did not need lectures on contraception because she was not intimate active and did not date boys. Teresa believed in her once again, continuing to wash her daughter's clothes every week and monitor her menstrual cycle. Around the same time, even the father began to notice Cassidy's uncharacteristic behavior. One day, when he saw her walking around the house wrapped in a blanket, he also had doubts. He tried to talk to her, as did the rest of the family, but Cassidy rejected any questions or suspicions. Her brother and sister also suspected something was wrong, particularly after the rumors that had spread around the school. They doubted that Cassidy had taken the pregnancy test honestly and even discussed their alarming assumptions with other family members. All of this reached their grandparents, but they too failed to get through to Cassidy, who continued to tell them that she had simply gained weight due to the transition period and now had a lot of complexes because of it. They believed her. By the middle of the summer, her belly had become so large that it was impossible to hide it with baggy clothes. She walked around wrapped in a blanket almost all day, but continued to insist that she was not pregnant. Cassidy ignored her loved ones and could even be rude in her responses. Realizing that it was impossible to get through to their daughter, her parents simply calmed down and continued to lead their usual lives. Of course, it is impossible to hide something like this forever, as the due date was approaching, and it all could turn into a terrible tragedy. On September 19, 2012, Teresa entered the bathroom after Cassidy had spent a long time in the shower. She noticed blood on the toilet and on the floor next to it. Alarmed, Teresa immediately suspected something was wrong and went to her daughter's room. There, she found Cassidy, who seemed exhausted. She was pale and looked sickly, but still refused to explain what was happening. Cassidy tried to act as if everything was fine. However, after discovering the blood, her mother insisted on taking her to the medical center's emergency room, where the doctors examined her daughter for a possible miscarriage. Cassidy eventually confessed to the doctors. After the examination, it was futile to deny it, so she admitted that she had indeed had a miscarriage. According to Cassidy, while she was sitting on the toilet, the fetus unexpectedly fell out, and she didn't have time to process what was happening. Allegedly, Cassidy accidentally washed the fetus away and only realized the gravity of the situation afterward. She was scared and didn't tell her mother about it. Cassidy received the necessary medical assistance, her wounds were treated, and she was sent home to recover. When Cassidy and her mother returned home, both tried not to talk about what had happened. Teresa provided her daughter with comprehensive support. On September 22, 2012, Teresa noticed a suspicious and unpleasant smell in Cassidy's room. Since Cassidy was not there, Teresa decided to do some cleaning, thinking her daughter had merely forgotten to throw out some food. Of course, she was curious about the source of the unpleasant odor and wanted to eliminate it. While sorting through dirty laundry, it quickly became apparent that the same unpleasant smell emanated from it. Digging to the bottom, she found a box containing a plastic bag. When she opened it, she found the lifeless body of a baby. Horrified, Teresa went to the police, reporting what had transpired. That same evening, law enforcement officers arrived at the Goodson house and took them to the station for questioning. Cassidy, without much resistance, admitted that there had been no miscarriage. She had simply given birth and hidden the baby's body from everyone. According to Cassidy's confession, on that fateful day, her water broke, but she managed to conceal it by soaking her bed linens. She then went to the bathroom, where she pretended to take a shower to disguise her actions. She bit down on a towel to endure the pain and stifle her cries while giving birth on the toilet, using scissors to remove the baby from herself. Once it was over, she used another towel to clean the bathroom of blood. Exhausted, she felt the baby breathing. Terrified of being exposed, she decided to get rid of him. Cassidy strangled her child, hid his body in a plastic bag, which she placed in a shoebox and concealed in her room. Remarkably, Cassidy managed to perform all these actions quickly and without being noticed by the rest of her family, who were at home at the time. The detective wanted to classify the crime properly, so they were interested in the details. Initially, Cassidy was uncooperative but eventually agreed to tell them everything, reconstructing the events on camera. She was given a doll resembling Santa Claus and demonstrated her actions, indicating what she had done. After the baby was in her arms, he did not open his eyes, leading her to realize with horror that she had grabbed the newborn by the throat and squeezed it with all her might. She believed the baby would not survive. The murder occurred while the child was still connected to her by the umbilical cord. Afterward, she cut it, washed everything, and wrapped the baby's body in a plastic bag before hiding it in the laundry container. Cassidy had not discarded the box with the body simply because she did not know how to dispose of it correctly. Only an autopsy could confirm or refute her words. The forensic expert determined that the baby had been born healthy and full term, weighing 9.5 pounds. So, the claim that the baby was born prematurely was impossible to uphold. The baby could have survived if not for the barbaric actions of his mother. The autopsy confirmed that the child died due to suffocation. Additionally, he had multiple injuries, including a head injury from blunt force trauma, likely from a fall after birth. However, this injury could not have been fatal. The most alarming injuries were the lacerations on the small body inflicted by the scissors, which had been used as a surgical instrument to extract the child from her. The detectives were puzzled as to why she left the baby's body in her room, as it seemed Cassidy did not even intend to dispose of it. The unbearable smell in the room ultimately exposed her. Psychologists suggested that this could be a form of remorse. Perhaps Cassidy wanted to be caught to receive what she believed was deserved punishment. Interestingly, Cassidy continued to remain silent about the identity of the baby's father. Detectives speculated whether her pregnancy could have resulted from another crime, such as abuse violence against a minor. But Cassidy only stated that she was trying to hide the pregnancy from her family out of fear that it would harm her relationships with her parents, whom she did not want to disappoint. She intended to give birth and get rid of the baby from the beginning, indicating that her actions were premeditated. After these revelations, Cassidy was arrested and taken to a correctional facility for juvenile offenders in the county. After assessing the nature of the crime, she was charged with premeditated murder. In addition, the question arose about bringing charges of child abuse under aggravating circumstances, also of the first degree. The police believed that her horrific act was enough to try the offender as an adult in order to seek a harsher sentence. They knew her as a smart girl who was never prone to violence. her parents insisted she was simply too immature to properly evaluate her horrific actions. Under the Florida criminal justice system for adults, the maximum penalty for first-degree murder is life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. However, due to Cassidy's age, she could not be sentenced to death. Additionally, earlier that same year, a ruling was issued by the U.S. Supreme Court declaring mandatory life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for juvenile prisoners unconstitutional. Cassidy's lawyer faced a difficult fight, not only with the system but also with outraged local residents who learned all the details of the crime and demanded the harshest punishment. Cassidy's parents found a good lawyer who managed to negotiate a plea bargain for manslaughter. The hearings were very emotional. The Goodson family supported Cassidy, and everyone cried, realizing that this murder could ruin many lives. Teresa was brought in for questioning before the trial began. Teresa denied knowing about the pregnancy and detailed how she had initially suspected her daughter was pregnant, but had taken her word for it after the pregnancy tests. She believed that her daughter was simply gaining weight, which could easily be explained by hormonal changes during adolescence. She insisted that if she had known about her daughter's delicate situation, she would have never allowed what happened. She would have supported her daughter and helped Cassidy with childbirth. Later, none of Cassidy's relatives were held accountable. In a video shown to the jury, Cassidy has been reproduced how she killed her newborn son. She repeated that as soon as he was born, she hoped that he was not breathing, but after touching him, she realized that this was not the case, he was alive and breathing. Cassidy then squeezed the baby's neck with her hands, simply to make him stop breathing so that she would not have any problems. It took her about a minute to kill the boy. At the sentencing, the judge emphasized that Cassidy had never previously encountered problems with the law and that the probability of her posing a threat to society was considered minimal. In his opinion, Cassidy was simply immature for such a responsible step as motherhood. However, she was old enough to be punished for her cruel act. During the sentencing, the judge expressed hope that she would not be in the dock for another crime. The prosecutor and the lawyer agreed that Cassidy deserved a second chance, and it was decided to send her to a special program at the Hillsborough Academy for Girls. As she left the courtroom, Cassidy wiped away tears with the sleeve of her prison uniform. A few months later, Cassidy had to appear in court again for the commission to decide her future. She was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison, with the stipulation that if she again went down a slippery path of crime, she would not receive another chance for rehabilitation. After her release, she would be under close supervision and must follow the rules. Upon the slightest violation, Cassidy could end up behind bars again, as an adult. Special attention was paid to the investigation of the child's paternity. Detectives were able to establish that it was another minor who did not even know about the pregnancy. The relationship between Cassidy and the boy had ended before the pregnancy. The specific name of the young man was never revealed, so that no one else would be implicated in this high-profile case, which had caused wide public resonance and uproar. Protracted disputes and debates were just beginning, as this case raised the whole country on its feet. All local and national media seemed to want to comment on the incident. In particular, one of the studies detailed numerous incidents similar to the Cassidy-Goodson case, identifying a common pattern: girls are most afraid of hiding their pregnancies from their mothers. It is noteworthy that many of these crimes are committed by unmarried girls who fear being judged by their parents. However, not everyone agreed with this theory. Some studies conducted by other experts indicated that fathers tend to be stricter in such matters. In any case, this raised the sensitive issue of the Goodson family's involvement and the contribution they made to the boy's death. Cassidy maintained she was compelled to hide her situation from her relatives, fearing relationship deterioration. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, she continued to insist on her version of events and openly lied. For many, this issue was particularly acute, especially after the events that unfolded. Experts in psychiatry had split into two camps. Some supported Cassidy and considered her family indirectly involved, while others solely blamed her for the crime. All of this sparked numerous debates, with research results being scrutinized and analyzed. For example, another expert study showed that 7 out of 9 girls who committed such crimes were their father's favorites or had grown up without a mother. Despite their lack of mental health issues in everyday life, they portrayed simplified roles that created a dangerous mix. This mix led to significant adjustments in their behavior and ultimately resulted in the murder of newborns. At the same time, these girls were often successful in their studies, participated in sports, and were popular in school, similar to Cassidy. This mix of roles caused a kind of guilt for being close to someone, which could distort their perception, making their own baby seem alien or harmful, something to be gotten rid of. Often, such teenagers hope of stillbirth, as it appears to be the easiest way to avoid responsibility. After that, they can dispose of the child without guilt and leave. All of this can be exacerbated by isolation from loved ones, as was observed in Cassidy's case. Refusing to discuss her problems with her family, she drove herself into a corner. Cassidy's actions sparked controversy, including debates about the topic of terminating pregnancies. It seemed that this would be an obvious solution to her problem. However, judging from the social media reactions and media coverage of the Cassidy Goodson story was used as an argument in favor of allowing abortions at such a young age. Many wondered why the burden of making such heavy decisions was entirely placed on an underage schoolgirl. Cassidy's parents' attempts to understand what was happening, they remained convinced that they had done absolutely nothing wrong. Questions arose about how one could not notice their daughter's growing belly and strange behavior. Why did they so easily and simplistically ignore the growth of her belly? Relatives noted that her behavior became increasingly uncharacteristic for her. Usually, close relatives noticed such changes, but in her case, it seemed as if everyone was indifferent to her fate. They were surprised that it took finding blood in the bathroom for her mother to understand what was happening. Why, before this event, did no one take Cassidy to a medical center? Some people attempted to shift the blame for the crime from Cassidy to her parents, believing that she simply did not receive enough attention from her loved ones. This, too, could have concealed the real reason for her desire to keep the pregnancy secret. People were divided on these issues, with many disturbed by the fact that scissors were used. According to doctors, Cassidy used them to cut herself, severing the umbilical cord of a still, living child. To quickly pull out the baby, she used an ordinary office tool as a surgical instrument. Naturally, Cassidy experienced severe pain, but to cope with it, she clenched a piece of towel in her teeth. It was unclear what led to this mental or emotional state, whether it was her own horror or fear of what her parents might do. She was terrified of enduring any punishment just to prevent her mother and father from discovering what was happening. This raised reasonable concerns about what was really occurring within the walls of her home, leading detectives to conduct a thorough investigation. However, suspicions of cruel treatment from the parents' side could not be confirmed, as no bruises or signs of abuse were found on Cassidy's body. The other children in the family denied any physical abuse from their mother and father. After a year and a half in a correctional facility for girls, Cassidy was released. She successfully completed a rehabilitation program for juvenile offenders, and it was noted that she was not aggressive. The risk of reoffending was considered minimal. Cassidy desperately resisted reintegrating into society, having lost all her friends, received threats, and feared going outside. She often admitted that she felt hated and even persecuted. Cassidy realized she was living in hell, and it was unclear when this would end. She returned to her bedroom, which her parents had left untouched since her arrest. Everything remained in its usual place, even the lotion she had used at the age of 14. The hardest part was looking into the eyes of her loved ones, who wanted to help her. Despite the traumatic events and the heinous act she committed, Cassidy did not abandon her desire to become a mother. In 2017, she married and gave birth to her first daughter, followed by her second daughter, 2 years later. After the birth of her second girl, she posted on her social media that she longed to have a boy. These events were not just happy moments in her life but also demonstrated Cassidy's determination to fight. She expressed online that people around her seemed to wish she wouldn't have children at all. When asked why, Cassidy responded with a smile, indicating that people could not forgive her for killing a baby and that she had many haters. Many wrote that they wanted Cassidy to remain behind bars for the rest of her life, unwilling to live next to a child killer. On her social media, Cassidy posted numerous photos portraying herself as a loving mother, a young woman trying to build her happiness and family. It seemed that with age, as she began to understand the full gravity of her crime, she struggled to forgive herself for the fact that her first child died. In fact, the boy did not even have a name. Cassidy didn't consider what to call him. Therefore, in the case of the murder of a newborn, he was simply referred to as Baby Goodson. All these years, Cassidy remained under close scrutiny from not only the authorities but also the public. Even after so long, people remained indignant about the fate of the boy strangled in the first minutes of life. In her posts, Cassidy often hinted at external pressure. In 2020, she made a post indicating that she was being subjected to constant harassment that she could no longer tolerate. Cassidy created a new account and began sharing her photos again. She studied to be a nurse at Madison College. It appears that the judge may have been mistaken in thinking that she had corrected her ways. Since 2021, she began to face legal troubles again and ended up in prison, just like her husband. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Shirley and Duguay. Choosing a soulmate is a very important step because this person can become the love of your life or a real nightmare. Shirley and Duguay was born on October 11, 1962. She was a native of Prince Edward Island, born and raised in the smallest of the Canadian provinces. Regarding her early years, she grew up in a close, knit family with two sisters. They had a loving father who supported them and was family-oriented, a value he passed on to his daughters. By 1994, Shirley was a 32-year-old mother of 5 children, 2 of whom were from previous relationships. However, she was going through a serious crisis with her husband, Douglas Beamish, with whom she had been in a relationship for several years. Shirley worked hard and devoted the rest of her time to her children. This was very helpful to her. She never lost faith in herself or people and maintained a positive attitude, constantly communicating with relatives and friends who supported her in every possible way. She truly needed that support as she barely managed to finalize her divorce proceedings with Doug. A dispute over custody of the children arose during their relationship, which had become increasingly oppressive. Shirley repeatedly complained that she was a victim of domestic violence. People in her close circle often saw traces of beatings on her. Despite the cruelty of the relationship, she rejected any proposals to separate, believing that her husband would simply kill her if she tried to leave. Even when Shirley reached a boiling point, her husband managed to keep her from getting a divorce. She was financially dependent on him, emotionally depressed, and simply afraid she would not be able to cope with the children without his support. Unfortunately, as they aged, his aggression began to shift toward the younger generation. At this point, Shirley sought support from the state to combat domestic violence. The Canadian justice system treated problems within the family with much less attention than the situation required. Despite numerous threats, statements, and evidence of aggression, Shirley failed to achieve any prohibitions or restrictions against Douglas. Finally gathering her strength, Shirley filed for divorce and moved out with the children. Now, the most pressing issue was the division of custody rights. During this period, she had 5 children aged 8 to 15. She feared for their health and safety given her husband's behavior. As a result, she sought sole custody of her 3 youngest children, fearing that Douglas would take revenge and shift his anger onto them. She intended to limit his opportunities for supervised visitations to no more than once a week. Additionally, she was counting on alimony because raising 5 children alone would be too challenging. Though she was already receiving small payments for 2 children from a previous relationship, it was not enough. Shirley's intentions only fueled Doug's anger. By the fall of 1994, she repeatedly expressed fears for her life. Yet, despite everything, she continued to hope for the best and led a normal life. On October 7, 1994, a woman found an abandoned car on Highway 169, near Tyne Valley in rural Prince Edward Island. She couldn't specify how long it had been there since she had been away from home for several days. Upon her return, she immediately noticed a car parked oddly in the middle of a field. When she approached to offer help to the driver, her worry grew. The car had no license plates, and on the windshield, there were numerous small splashes resembling blood. There was no one near the car, so she quickly contacted the police. Upon receipt of report, the law enforcement officers arrived at the scene and confirmed that something terrible had possibly happened in the car. Inside, they found many bloodstains but no signs of a struggle or dragging nearby, suggesting it had been abandoned far from where a confrontation had taken place. Investigators wondered if the victim of such an attack could have survived. Due to the lack of license plates, identifying the car took longer. Eventually, detectives discovered it belonged to 32-year-old Shirley and Duguay. They tried to contact her, but to no avail, as her address was not known. They could only find her father and children. As it turned out, none of her relatives or friends had heard anything about her despite several police calls. Shirley had stopped responding to calls 4 days before the witness reported the abandoned car, approximately on October 3rd. It was normal for her to leave periodically for work, so during that entire time, no one suspected anything was wrong. No one could find the mother of the children, leading the police to begin a search operation, considering Shirley might be in danger. Given the amount of blood in the cabin, it was evident that the attack had been committed with great cruelty. This was also indicated by the nature of the splashes, which were analyzed by experts. Blood doesn't randomly splatter all over a cabin from random blows, it suggested a prolonged beating. Such behavior was atypical for either robbery or abuse, as typically, brutal criminals are well acquainted with their victims. Naturally, the immediate environment of Shirley was inspected, and everyone who knew Shirley pointed to her ex-husband, Doug. There were no other suspects, only he had issues with her. This man constantly beat her and threatened her. Investigators decided to interview Doug. He confirmed that he had a tense relationship with his wife but blamed her difficult character. He denied any accusations of domestic violence and cruelty on his part, accusing his wife of wanting to spite him after the divorce. Given the capabilities of forensic science in 1994, it was not possible to quickly determine the source of the blood found in the car. Doug behaved calmly, and there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Despite numerous witnesses believing him guilty, this was deemed insufficient. The main problem was the absence of a body. It remained unclear what happened to Shirley, so she was still considered missing. Days, weeks, and months passed. It became obvious to everyone that she was likely not alive, but the only suspect persisted. Authorities combed a vast area with a radius of tens of kilometers around where they found the abandoned car. The squad did manage to find valuable evidence, but no direct indications of Doug's involvement. Detectives interrogated him repeatedly again, but to no avail. When they compared the blood found in the car with samples from Shirley's relatives, they confirmed that the profiles matched, which meant the victim of the beating in the car, as expected, was Shirley. Interestingly, in addition to Shirley's blood, traces belonging to someone else were found inside the car. Analysis compared to Doug's blood showed that the additional blood belonged to him. However, without a body, even this evidence did not establish a direct link to the crime or elicit a confession from him. He insisted that the car was his, as Shirley had used it during their 15-year relationship, and he could have repeatedly injured himself inside it. It was impossible to calculate the exact time of his bloodstain's appearance. All of this caused bewilderment and discontent among the relatives of Shirley. The local community was also outraged because a dangerous person was walking free. Many believed in Doug's guilt. The Duguay family insisted that he was the only one capable of such cruelty. In the car, there were numerous splatters of blood, and experts indicated they resulted from medium force blows. However, the police were not sure if the criminal had used a weapon. The cushion on Shirley's seat was soaked in blood. She had used it to sit while driving. Being a petite woman, about 150 centimeters tall and weighing around 45 kilograms, she needed the cushion to control the vehicle effectively. The cushion had blood from 2 different sources mixed. About 1 kilometer from the abandoned car, they discovered a shovel with traces of blood and 2 black hairs. This evidence became the first valuable clue examined by forensic scientists in the laboratory. Microscopic analysis and comparison with the hairs found on Shirley confirmed they belonged to her. By this time, the search operation had been underway for more than a month. The most significant find was a thick plastic bag containing a pair of sports shoes and a leather jacket, both covered in blood. The items were located 2.5 kilometers from Shirley's car. The blood stain analysis confirmed they belonged to Shirley. However, the shoes and jacket were clearly not her size, were more consistent with a man's. When questioned about the sneakers and jacket, Douglas denied ever having worn anything like that. Unfortunately, there was once again no confirmation of this, as his blood was not found on the jacket or shoes. Detectives noticed that the sizes matched, but this was not enough to bring charges. The list of evidence included significant circumstantial evidence. It turned out to be a tough nut to crack, so more information was needed. The found shoes were sent to shoe expert Key Beadle. He knew well that each person wears shoes in their own way. Differences in shape, size, and structure of feet result in unique features in mechanics. Each person's gait is as unique as their fingerprints. If the shoes had been worn for a long time, this would affect the geometry and wear characteristics. Dr. Key began studying the marks left on the insole and the inner surface of the sole. As part of the investigation, a warrant was obtained to create casts of Douglas's feet. This became an important stage in the process. In parallel, the expert analyzed the condition of the insoles and soles of the discovered shoes, revealing that the criminal had a deformed big toe. A small, twisted print suggested that Doug had used them. Nevertheless, Doug continued to deny his involvement. Forensic experts placed great hopes on analyzing the jacket, which had peculiar fibers, including 20 thin white hairs. With this exception, no other evidence remained on the clothing. The forensic experts examined the fibers under a microscope and found that they resembled animal hair rather than human hair. The detectives were busy with the investigation, and one of them recalled an important detail. When he first came to speak with Doug at his home, he saw a white cat named Snowball. By connecting the owner of the jacket to the animal, they could potentially establish who owned the item of clothing. The police became convinced that these lint particles were left by the criminal's cat, which led to the key question of how to prove the criminal's guilt through his pet. The search began for an expert who dealt with such matters. Detectives made hundreds of phone calls and were amazed to find that such studies had not yet been explored in the history of criminology and forensic science. The closest researchers were pet experts studying their genes to combat diseases. Dr. Stephen O'Brien, a geneticist from the National Institute in the USA, spent decades studying hereditary diseases in cats, including cancer. He knew more about pet genetics than anyone else in the world. However, even he did not promise much. Comparing the DNA profile of Snowball with detected fibers was a unique task. First, it was necessary to obtain a blood sample from the cat, but the owner of the pet was not inclined to cooperate with the police. A significant amount of time was spent just catching the cat on the street and getting a blood sample. Finally, Dr. O'Brien received samples of Snowball's materials, including fur, which were transported almost under escort. Fortunately, many of these hair follicles were preserved, providing enough for a DNA profile comparison. Dr. O'Brien confirmed that the fibers belonged to the same animal. However, a new question arose. Prince Edward Island was nearly isolated, and the doctor had serious suspicions that many domestic cats lived there, which could mean they were all related. If this was indeed the case, then comparing DNA profiles could show a match with any two animals in the province, calling into question all the work done. The police were not planning to give up, so they decided to gather at least 24 blood samples from cats in the area, which would later be delivered to Dr. O'Brien's laboratory for analysis and comparison. This process took even more time, during which the dangerous criminal was still at large. When the report was finally ready, Dr. O'Brien confirmed that there was great genetic diversity among the cats on Prince Edward Island. Not a single pair of the 20 samples collected matched. This led to the conclusion that, apart from Snowball, only one of the 70 million cats could have owned this fur, which became a turning point that confirmed the white fur of the jacket belonged to Douglas's cat. Despite this evidence, Douglas continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the jacket and claimed he had no idea where his ex-wife was. More than 6 months passed, but the body of Shirley was still not found. 7 months after the disappearance of Shirley, a random fisherman was sailing along the river in Enmore. He noticed something suspicious in the bushes along the shore but could not see it clearly. So, he decided to swim closer. From a distance of several meters, he realized that the remains definitely belonged to a person, but the stature was so small that the fisherman initially thought it was a child. They was far from the city, so he thought that wild animals might have dragged someone's body away. He covered the remains with his raincoat and went towards the city to contact the police. When the authorities finally arrived, they saw the remains of a woman in a state of severe decomposition. The situation was not as dire as it could have been because the remains had not been exposed to extreme heat, which partially alleviated the decomposition situation. The examination confirmed that the body belonged to Shirley and Duguay. Although it was buried, the body surfaced due to abnormal weather conditions that made the coastal soil unstable, causing it to wash away. Despite the degree of decomposition, it was obvious that Shirley had been subjected to cruelty. The exact cause of death could not be established. There were several theories. One suggested that she had been strangled, while another proposed that she was beaten with a shovel, as the shovel was found earlier. However, it could not be ruled out that the blood stain on the shovel was made after Shirley's death. The killer might have accidentally caused damage when digging up the makeshift grave. Shirley's jaw had been beaten and was broken in 3 places, with one of her missing teeth found in her lungs. The situation had changed dramatically, and it remained to be understood what the motive was, making it possible to hold Douglas accountable. After the body was discovered, investigators decided to take a fresh look at the old evidence and re-examine the area around Shirley's house and car. This yielded important results. First of all, they discovered a letter that had been overlooked earlier, contained threats. Thanks to this letter, the motive for the murder was revealed. It turned out that immediately after Shirley filed for sole custody rights, Douglas wrote her a frightening note in which he said he would be happier to see her in the grave than to lose the children forever. This could have been a cruel joke if not for the alarming fact that this letter was written in her ex-husband's blood. Unfortunately, Shirley did not have time to disclose this, publicize it, or show it to the police, as the criminal carried out his sentence earlier. Additionally, in the house of Shirley, they found photographs showing Shirley and Douglas together. He in the image wore the very jacket from which the hairs of his cat were later found. Finally, a little more than a month after the murder, Douglas was arrested and placed under custody until the hearing began. On July 19, 1996, Douglas Beamish ended up in court, largely thanks to his cat, Snowball, who was instrumental in the pursuit of justice. Douglas was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This case became the first in crime history where DNA and animal materials were used as evidence of a criminal's guilt. According to Dr. O'Brien, the day he began examining and comparing those white hairs marked the birth of veterinary forensic examination. In the following years, this practice was utilized many times and led to the imprisonment of several dangerous criminals. The center at the University of California, Davis, has used its methods in more than 500 cases over the past 15 years, confirming that the tools used to profile human DNA also work reliably on animals. Shirley's daughter, Shelley, grew up to become an advocate for abused women. She spoke about how, as a child, she watched her mother being beaten by her father. After his conviction, Douglas ended up in the Ontario Correctional Centre. In 1998 and 1999, he tried to appeal his conviction but was denied, as DNA evidence is considered irrefutable. In 2013, he first attempted to exercise his right to parole. However, he was again refused, as the commission ruled that the risk of committing another crime was too high. This was not the end of Douglas's story. After almost 25 years behind bars, discussions began about releasing the killer from prison under escort for 12 hours. Another meeting of the parole commission was held, during which relatives were present. Shirley's sister, Marie Arsenault, spoke out, stating that the murder of her sister had triggered a series of family tragedies. One sister became addicted to alcohol as a means of coping with the pain of loss. It spiraled out of control after Shirley's death. She died first due to health problems, and then her husband committed to end his own life because he could not cope with the death of his beloved wife, having tried to save her until the last moment. She insisted that if Douglas was released, he should be prohibited from living on Prince Edward Island. Shirley's father suffered a series of heart attacks after Marie spoke at the parole board meeting. Interestingly, during these hearings, Douglas took responsibility for Shirley's death for the first time. Prior to this, he had persistently denied his guilt. The commission determined that he still posed a high risk of reoffending, including crimes related to violence and cruelty. Despite finally admitting guilt and realizing the seriousness of his actions, it was believed that significant work still needed to be done before he was ready for full parole. Until that point, he had found it easier to blame others for what had happened than to face the truth. During his time in prison, Douglas suffered 3 heart attacks and kidney failure, nearly dying several times. He is currently serving his sentence in Dorchester Prison, having been transferred there a year before the hearing, during which he was granted a 12-hour escorted release. He expressed a desire to attend a rehabilitation center for ex-offenders convicted of serious crimes located in the Moncton area. Notably, the parole board noted 2 incidents demonstrating that he was not yet ready for life on the outside. In 2019, he threw a knife while preparing food in the kitchen of a minimum security correctional facility, and a year later, he went on a hunger strike, claiming dissatisfaction with the food provided by prison staff. Following the end of the meeting, a decision regarding Douglas Beamish's 12-hour temporary release was not established. He himself stated that he believed he was not ready for full release but wanted to visit a rehabilitation center in Moncton as he did not want to return to Prince Edward Island. It is worth noting that the Correctional Service of Canada had previously allowed him to be temporarily absent under escort for medical reasons and out of compassion. Both occasions took place without incident. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Thomas Kwan. On January 22, 2024, Patrick O'Hara, 70, presented to the emergency department at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle upon Tyne with severe pain in his upper arm, particularly at the site of the vaccine injection he had received a few hours earlier. Initially, the medical staff suspected that his pain was a result of a poor injection. They provided him with antibiotics and painkillers, advised him to monitor his arm closely. However, Patrick's situation worsened. Within hours, his arm developed blisters and changed color. The following day, he returned to the hospital, where doctors were confused by the rapid decline in his condition. Blood tests were performed but did not reveal any significant issues. Eventually, it became evident that Patrick was experiencing a necrotizing infection that was damaging his tissue, particularly around the injection site. It was likely that he had not received a vaccine but rather a toxin that led to these serious complications. To contain the infection and save Patrick's life, he required surgery to remove the infected tissue. Meanwhile, specialists were working to identify the substance that had caused his condition, as knowing the specific poison involved could help doctors formulate a more effective treatment plan. Dr. Emmett, an expert in the field, suggested that iodomethane could be responsible for Patrick's condition. Iodomethane is highly toxic, and exposure can cause burns and blisters similar to those Patrick was experiencing. There had been no prior instances of methane injections in humans, making its use particularly risky, and the substance is almost impossible to detect in the body. At around 10 a.m. on the morning of January 22, while Patrick was feeling ill, a male nurse named Raj Patel from the National Health Service arrived at his home. Nurse Raj Patel was assigned to examine Patrick and arrived at his and his partner Jenny's residence. He spoke with an Asian accent and in broken English, appearing slightly awkward but competent. The visit lasted about 4 minutes, during which he collected blood and urine samples from Patrick. Jenny, Patrick's partner, came downstairs during the check and asked to have her blood pressure taken, to which Raj agreed. After that, Patrick started preparing to administer a booster vaccine. Even though he mentioned that he had already received this vaccine less than 3 months earlier, Raj insisted that he needed another dose. When Raj administered the injection, Patrick experienced sharp and intense pain. Raj assured him that this was a normal reaction and that the pain would soon subside. However, after giving the injection, Raj quickly gathered his equipment and left the house, which Patrick found suspicious. At the hospital, where Patrick was placed in intensive care, the doctors noticed several letters that he and Jenny had received recently. They informed Jenny that there was no local nursing staff and that the National Health Service had no nurse named Raj Patel. This letter turned out to be a forgery, and the health worker was a fraud. The forgery was well crafted. It featured the National Health Service logo at the top, included hyperlinks, and used medical language along with personal privacy notes typical of unofficial reports. Another letter, sent earlier that month, followed a similar format. It included a QR code that directed Patrick to a short health questionnaire and suggested a home visit on January 22 between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. The day before this, Patrick received a reminder text message from an unknown number, claiming to be from a health worker named Patel. However, Patrick only became suspicious when Nurse Raj began to act nervously during the injection. One particular action raised alarms. As Raj was leaving, Jenny came down the stairs and told him he was as tall as her son. This startled Patrick, and she chased after him, but he disappeared. Northumbria police then began tracking him from his home in Newcastle city centre. CCTV footage showed him driving to a hotel and checking in. Raj arrived in a car with fake number plates. He checked into the hotel using a false name. 2 hours later, he left his room wearing a long coat, a flat cap, blue surgical gloves, and a medical mask. He walked through the hotel lobby and exited the building. It was less than a 10-minute walk from the hotel to Patrick and Jenny's home on St. Thomas's Street. In the UK, number plates are specific to the make and model of the vehicle they are assigned to. The number plates on Raj's vehicle were easily identifiable as counterfeit. They matched the car's make but not its model. Investigators traced the car back to the hotel that morning and then to its original location, which led them to the small town of Ingleby Barwick, south of Newcastle in Stockton. The car had left the home of Thomas Kwan, son of Jenny Leung. Jenny has several sons from her first marriage, but she noticed a resemblance between her eldest son, Thomas Kwan, 50, and Raj Patel. Thomas was born in Hong Kong and moved to the UK 39 years ago at the age of 13. His parents sent him to an English boarding school, and he later studied medicine at Newcastle University. He is now a general practitioner and a partner at Happy House Clinic in Sunderland, about a half-hour's drive from his mother's home. Thomas had a troubled relationship with his mother, likely stemming from their parents' divorce that occurred 27 years ago. Many of Thomas's issues with her revolved around money. He believed that before their separation, his mother, Jenny, had taken £1 million from their joint account and pressured his father into the divorce. Years later, when his father passed away, Thomas was upset to find that he received a smaller portion of the inheritance compared to his younger brother. In a letter to his mother, Thomas expressed his feelings, accusing her of being unfair and of stealing money from his father. He asked her to clarify the changes in the will and accused her of betrayal. Patrick, trying to ease the tension, asked Thomas to leave the house and confronted him emotionally. Jenny's actions further complicated the family dynamics. The police were called to the scene, but Thomas left before they arrived. This incident deeply affected the relationship between him and his mother, Jenny. Since then, Thomas has had little contact with her and has not visited. When authorities began investigating the case of the fake nurse, they discovered that Thomas's name appeared in their review of the nurse's route. CCTV footage showed the car traveling from Newcastle to Ingleby Barwick, heading directly to Thomas's house. This connection raised suspicions among investigators, who found it odd that a vehicle linked to the crime was seen near Thomas's residence. They quickly sought more information about him. It was revealed that there had been a conflict over a will, which could have provided a motive for his involvement. Investigators also discovered that Thomas had previously purchased chemicals, including toxic substances, which could have been used to create the agent that made Patrick sick. These online purchases became a significant focus of the investigation. The police then searched Thomas's home and found packages of chemical reagents and equipment in his garage that resembled a laboratory. They also discovered medical supplies, including syringes, gloves, and protective masks. On Thomas's computer, investigators found searches relating to toxic substances and how to use them. Additionally, there were fake National Health Service forms that matched those sent to Patrick and Jenny. Further investigation revealed that Thomas had planned the crime well in advance, using his medical expertise and available resources. He fabricated an elaborate story to pose as a fake nurse, knowing exactly how to speak, present himself, and what documents to provide. However, his rushed escape after administering the injection, along with other blunders, ultimately worked against him. The police arrested Thomas on February 15, 2024. At the time of his arrest, he denied any involvement in Patrick's poisoning, but the evidence against him grew increasingly compelling. The case was classified as attempted murder, and preparations were made for it to go to court. Thomas leveraged his medical reputation and knowledge to create a false appearance of professionalism. He orchestrated the entire scheme to avoid detection until it was too late. During a search of his home, police discovered not only chemicals and instructions but also complete production equipment, including measuring instruments, protective suits, and laboratory containers. The investigation revealed that Thomas had been planning his crime for an extended period, gathering resources and researching their characteristics. His mobile phone contained clear evidence of his intentions, showing multiple internet searches for poisons. He specifically looked for information on how to use ricin to carry out a slow and painful murder. His searches included terms like ricin dosage, duration of the toxin, and cyanide effects on the human body, indicating that he aimed to proceed carefully and minimize errors. Despite his planning, Thomas made several mistakes that led to the investigation uncovering his scheme. For example, he used a fake license plate on his car, but the police quickly noticed that the plates didn't match the car model. Additionally, his disguise as a nurse was inadequate. Jenny's comment that he resembled her son raised initial suspicions. His quick departure from home after administering the injection and his suspicious behavior further contributed to the doubts about him. Books on toxicology and instructions for creating poisons found in Thomas's possession strengthened the case against him. Additionally, a copy of the National Center of Excellence for Police Investigation Manual on Murder was discovered on his computer. This manual could provide a criminal with insights on how to avoid detection. The evidence suggested that Thomas planned to commit the murder with great precision while minimizing the risk of being caught. What was particularly alarming was how he manipulated his family. The letters, text messages, and Thomas's fabricated identity as a nurse indicated that he was orchestrating a large-scale scheme. It was shocking to think that a doctor, someone who was supposed to save lives, was involved in such a heinous crime. When arrested, Thomas denied all accusations. However, the evidence gathered, including chemicals, laboratory equipment, books, and digital records, painted an undeniable picture of his guilt. The investigation revealed that he acted with cold calculation, leveraging his expertise and resources to commit a deliberate poisoning with the intent to kill. He refused to admit guilt regarding attempted murder, but the evidence, including his internet searches, was compelling. The police also found that Thomas had been spying on his mother and her partner, Patrick. He had installed spyware on a laptop they gave him, which allowed him to monitor their daily activities, read emails, and track financial transactions in real time, taking screenshots and saving correspondence to support his suspicions of misuse of the family's money. What was especially shocking was that Thomas devised multiple plans for the murder before finally deciding to impersonate a nurse. One of his ideas involved sending poisoned drinks or food while pretending to be part of a made-up group called the Northern Wine Tasting Club, offering free samples. These plans revealed just how far he was willing to go to achieve his goal. When Thomas created the nurse persona, Raj Patel, He made a fake ID with his own picture, used a wig, and glued on a beard. He not only had a detailed cover story but also props to support his disguise in case anyone questioned him. During the 40 minutes he spent in the house, he managed to deceive even his own mother by acting like a caring healthcare worker. This revelation stunned those who knew Thomas. Patients were shocked to find out that their doctor was involved in such a crime. Many expressed that the trust typically inspired by a man in a doctor's uniform was ruthlessly exploited. Residents in the neighborhood watched in horror as the investigation disrupted their quiet suburb. While Patrick was in intensive care, doctors worked hard to save his life. He underwent several surgeries to remove dead tissue and stop the infection from spreading further. Additionally, he needed plastic surgery to repair the damage to his arm. Fortunately, Patrick survived, but he faces a long road to full recovery. Thomas Kwan was arrested but refused to cooperate with the medical team trying to determine what substance was injected into Patrick. By staying silent, he raised suspicions that he deliberately aimed to cause serious harm. The investigation indicated that he probably used iodine. During the proceedings, Thomas asserted that he did not intend to kill anyone, he merely sought to inflict mild pain or discomfort. However, when his trial commenced in Newcastle in October 2024, this assertion quickly fell apart in light of the evidence presented. Prosecutor Peter Makepeace, in his opening statement, reminded the jury that sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction. He pointed out that Thomas's careful and detailed planning suggested that his intentions were far more serious than he claimed. Thomas's knowledge of poisons, his extensive research, and his experience made it clear that he fully understood the life-threatening nature of his actions. Moreover, Thomas's motivation went beyond mere financial gain. Even though the inheritance he received after dividing property with his relatives was relatively small, his feelings of grievance ran deeper. He accused his mother of not loving him enough during his childhood and framed the attack on Patrick, her partner, as a means to emotionally hurt her in revenge. On the second day of the trial, October 7, 2024, Thomas pleaded guilty, which spared the court from weeks of hearings. The victim, Patrick O'Hara, shared how the attack affected his life. Thomas received a severe sentence that reflected both the seriousness of his crime and the level of planning involved. The judge noted that while some aspects of Thomas's plan were poorly executed, such as using fake license plates that didn't match the car model, he had put a significant amount of effort into preparing for the crime. This level of planning justified a lengthy sentence. Thomas Kwan was sentenced to 31 years and 5 months in prison. His guilty plea and clean record prior to the incident were taken into consideration during sentencing. Patrick O'Hara faced challenges in his recovery, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which ultimately led to the end of his long-term relationship with Jenny. Despite these difficulties, Patrick expressed his appreciation for the professionals at the National Health Service who saved his life. After the trial, he gradually returned to a normal routine, though he continued to experience physical and emotional reminders of the attack. Nonetheless, this incident became a catalyst for new beginnings for him. After parting ways with Jenny, he relocated from Newcastle to a quiet coastal town where he found peace. While there, Patrick focused on helping victims of violence and fraud. He began speaking at conferences and in the media to share his story and emphasize the importance of remaining vigilant, even in everyday situations. Meanwhile, Jenny, overwhelmed by her son's actions and her guilt toward Patrick, worked on improving her family relationships. She stepped back from public life to concentrate on her family, but her bond with Thomas was never repaired. In prison, Thomas Kwan began to understand the seriousness of his actions. In isolation, he had to confront his motives and the harm he had caused to his family. However, prison records indicated that he still had a long way to go before he felt true remorse. At the beginning of his sentence, he continued to rationalize his actions, feeling a sense of injustice. Patrick, who had endured many hardships, found happiness in simple pleasures, like walks by the sea and friendships with those who valued him for who he was. He often expressed that his greatest achievement was learning to trust again. Although the scars on his hand never disappeared, he came to see them not as reminders of pain, but as symbols of the strength he discovered to keep moving forward, even in the toughest times. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of the DeFeo family. To truly understand it all, let's first get to know the DeFeo family, who once lived in a house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York. Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., more commonly known as Big Ronnie, was born on November 16, 1930, to parents Rocco and Antoinette DeFeo. When he was younger, Big Ronnie was slender, handsome, and had a powerful gaze reminiscent of the legendary Rudolph Valentino. With his suave looks, he attracted the attention of Louise Marie DeFeo, who was born on November 3, 1931, to Michael John Briganti Jr. and Angelina Maria Briganti. Louise had aspirations of becoming a model. She was beautiful enough to mingle with the best, including the famous singer Mel Torme. After a brief courtship, Big Ronnie and Louise married. However, the Briganti family disapproved of Big Ronnie, cutting all ties with the newlyweds until September 26, 1951, when their son Ronald DeFeo Jr. was born. He would later be known as Butch. Growing up, Butch faced many struggles as the firstborn son. His father expected a lot from him, and Big Ronnie was not afraid to discipline Butch in harsh ways. One minute he would hug his son, and the next he would throw him across the room. Louise's brother, Michael John Briganti Jr., would later testify at the DeFeo trial about an incident he witnessed when Butch was only 2 years old. He recalled, "They were all sitting down in the basement watching TV, and he don't know what the boy had done, but all of a sudden, the father just pushed the boy into the wall. The boy banged his head or part of his shoulder or something." As a child, Butch was extremely overweight, a problem that would persist until his late teenage years when he began using amphetamines. His school life suffered as a result, with bigger kids often teasing him and calling him names like the Blob, Bucky Beaver, and Pork Chop. On July 29, 1956, Louise gave birth to a daughter, Dawn Teresa DeFeo. A few years later, on August 16, 1961, Louise gave birth to Allison Louise, and then again on September 4, 1962, to Mark Gregory. Sometime after Mark's birth, Louise decided to leave her husband for reasons that remain unclear. To win her back, Big Ronnie determination to express his love. On October 24, 1965, Big Ronnie was blessed with a third son, John Matthew. By this time, the family had moved from their Brooklyn apartment to a lavish home on the south shore of Long Island in the affluent community of Amityville. Many wondered how Big Ronnie, working as a car dealer service manager, could afford such a luxurious home. The answer was clear: his father-in-law, Michael John Briganti Sr. In the early 1970s, Big Ronnie decided he wanted life-sized portraits to immortalize his family. Michael Jr. picked up the tab, which was estimated to be at least $50,000. The painstakingly detailed portraits took over a year to complete, and when finished, they hung in large golden frames on the staircase wall between the first and second floors of the DeFeo home. By this point, Butch had become increasingly troublesome as he got older. The DeFeos owned an auto body shop where Butch worked, but he spent more time at bars than actually working. His growing addiction to banned substance and alcohol only made things worse, driving him to violence against his own family. There was even an incident where he pulled a gun on his father, and countless other times he lashed out physically at those closest to him. Then, in the early hours of November 13, 1974, Butch completely snapped. Armed with a rifle, he moved silently through the house, murdering his family members one by one as they slept. What's truly chilling about this is that, despite the brutal killings taking place within just 15 minutes, the bodies showed no signs of struggle. Even more bizarre, the sound of gunshots didn't wake any of the other family members, or at least didn't rouse them from their beds. The bodies were found all face down on their beds, almost as if they had been carefully placed that way. To add to the eerie nature of the crime, the rifle had no silencer, yet aside from the family dog barking, none of the neighbors reported hearing a single gunshot that night. After committing the horrific murders, Butch calmly took a bath, got dressed for work, and then reported the crime, claiming he discovered the gruesome scene after returning home. He even suggested that a mafia hitman, Louis Fellini, along with 2 accomplices, was responsible. However, a police interview soon revealed serious inconsistencies in his story. The next day, Butch admitted to carrying out the murders himself. Fellini, the supposed hitman, had an airtight alibi, proving he was out of state at the time of the killings. DeFeo confessed, saying, once he started, he just couldn't stop. It went so fast. He went on to explain how he took a bath, changed his clothes, and carefully disposed of key evidence, including his blood-stained clothes, the Marlin rifle, and cartridges, before going to work as if nothing had happened. It was claimed that Butch had been hearing voices that urged him to commit the murders. However, the prosecution brought in a psychiatrist. According to the psychiatrist, Butch wasn't hearing voices or possessed by another personality. He simply didn't see anything wrong with killing his family. Because of that, DeFeo was convicted on 6 counts of murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, which he continued to serve at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York until he died on March 12, 2021. Just over a year after the tragic deaths of the DeFeo family, the home on Ocean Boulevard was sold to the Lutz family, who would soon unknowingly step into a new chapter of horror. The Amityville home, marked by its horrific past, raises the question of whether the tragic events left behind some lingering eerie energy haunting the land where it all unfolded. However, the Lutz family wouldn't have to wonder for long. They would soon share their own unsettling experiences in the home. Although the price was a bit higher than their budget of $30,000 to $50,000, something about the house pulled them in. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a boathouse sitting right on the Amityville River. Don't think for a second that the Lutz family wasn't aware of the horrific murders that had taken place there. In fact, they knew all about the house's dark past. But despite that, the Lutzes fell in love with the property and decided it was meant to be theirs. They bought the house for a bargain price of $80,000, never once thinking it was unlivable because of its tragic history. However, what was supposed to be their dream home soon turned into a waking nightmare. The strange and terrifying events that followed were later shared with the world by author Jay Anson in his famous book, The Amityville Horror. Before moving into the house, George Lutz was a successful businessman, but after settling in new house, something changed. He became sluggish, cold, and irritable. Most bizarre of all, he started waking up at 3:15 in the morning every night, unable to get back to sleep. It wasn't just random, it was the exact time the DeFeo murders had occurred. One night, George was startled to see his 5-year-old daughter, Missy, standing by her bedroom window. But what sent chills down his spine was the eerie outline of a pig's face with glowing red eyes staring at him from behind her. He rushed into her room, only to find Missy sound asleep, as if nothing had happened. Not long after, Missy talked about a new friend, an imaginary pig named Jody. But was Jody really imaginary? In another bone-chilling moment, George looked at his wife Kathy as she lay sleeping, but something was horribly wrong. Her face had distorted and aged, as if she'd become a 90-year-old woman overnight. At times, Kathy seemed to undergo strange transformations, aging rapidly and looking like someone else entirely. Her mother even witnessed this unnatural change firsthand. But the strange events didn't stop there. The house seemed to have a mind of its own. Doors were ripped off their hinges, and in the middle of a freezing winter, a room was suddenly filled with flies. Outside, cloven hoofprints appeared in the snow, right near their doorstep. Inside, green slime started to ooze down the walls, and then in the basement, they discovered a hidden room that didn't appear on any of the house's original blueprints. The room was painted a deep, unsettling red and was only large enough for 2 people to sit close together. But what was even more disturbing was the faint rancid odor that lingered in the room, adding to the overwhelming sense of dread that hung in the air. George even tried bringing their family dog into the mysterious basement room, but the animal refused to step inside. The usually dog backed away, tail tucked, and whimpered in fear. It was the first time George had ever seen the dog so terrified, as if it sensed something lurking in the shadows, something invisible to human eyes but deeply unsettling to an animal's instincts. The eerie experiences didn't stop there. One night, George was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of a band playing downstairs. The lively music echoed through the house as if an invisible group was holding a late-night gathering. Confused and unnerved, he made his way to the living room to investigate, but the moment he stepped inside, everything went silent. No music, no people, nothing. Yet something had definitely been there. The rug had been rolled up, and the furniture had been shifted, as if a dance floor had been cleared for a ghostly celebration. Desperate for help, the Lutz family reached out to a priest, hoping for some kind of blessing or relief from the terrifying events. However, the moment the priest stepped into the house, things took a dark turn. He was overwhelmed by a sudden intense sickness and began to experience his own set of unexplained disturbances. Some force seemed to be warning him to stay away. The impact of these events reached far beyond the Lutz family. Author J. Anson recalled how meeting the priest convinced him that this was more than just a story, it was real. From there, he started to create the book. On January 14, 1976, after just 28 days of living in what they thought would be their dream home, the Lutz family experienced a night so terrifying that they made a split-second decision. They packed a few bags, left everything else behind, and fled, never to return. According to a 2005 interview with George Lutz, he emphasized that their departure wasn't planned. They didn't wake up that morning thinking they were leaving for good. This was their home. When they left, they didn't know they wouldn't be coming back. They didn't know that everything they left behind they would never see again. Their abandoned belongings, untouched and frozen in time, were later set to be auctioned off. The house that had once seemed like a fresh start had turned into something they could never return to. Determined to share their horrifying experience, the Lutz family recounted every chilling detail to writer Anson. He would go on to transform their story into the instant bestseller in 1977. The book gripped the public, with the Los Angeles Times calling it both fascinating and frightening. Some critics believed its success wasn't just about ghosts and haunted houses. They argued that the story resonated with people because of the unstable political and economic climate in the United States at the time. Rampant inflation, rising interest rates, a crippling oil shortage had left the country anxious and uneasy. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the horrors inside the Amityville house weren't the only ones haunting the Lutz family. Their business was struggling due to the failing economy, and at the worst possible time, the IRS launched an investigation into their taxes. For many readers in the late 70s, this felt all too real, paranormal or not. Financial stress and uncertainty were things they knew all too well. By blending supernatural terror with real-life struggles, the Amityville horror struck a nerve with the American public. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a reflection of the fears people were living with every day. Some critics even argued that the book cleverly capitalized on popular horror trends of the time, the trope of a once-loving father turning violent and unrecognizable. When asked if he had experienced anything strange while writing the book, Anson quickly dismissed the idea, replying, "No." However, he did suffer a heart attack soon after finishing it, though he insisted it was due to his smoking and unhealthy lifestyle rather than anything paranormal. But while Anson shrugged off any supernatural connection, eerie incidents followed those who got too close to the story. Several people who handled early copies of the manuscript reportedly had near-fatal or fatal encounters. One of Anson's friends had a fire break out in his car while driving the manuscript back to the publisher. Another friend and his son nearly drowned when their car plunged into the water, but when rescuers opened the trunk, the manuscript inside was mysteriously dry, despite being stored in a simple clasped envelope. In the most chilling case, a woman who had been given the first 2 chapters to read died in a house fire the very night she received them, and among the charred remains of her home, the pages of the manuscript were found completely untouched. The terrifying tale of the Lutz family has since been adapted into several films, with the most famous being the 1979 version starring James Brolin. In 2005, the Amityville Horror returned to the big screen with Ryan Reynolds stepping into the role of George Lutz, following in the footsteps of James Brolin. Both movies stayed true to the eerie backstory of the infamous house where a gruesome mass murder had taken place, but they each took creative liberties to crank up the terror. Then there's how the house itself is portrayed. The older film leans into the idea that the house is a sinister entity influencing Ronald DeFeo Jr. to kill his family in 1974, while the remake shifts the horror to the ghosts of the victims, making them the primary source of terror. The priest who tried to help the Lutz family also meets different fates depending on the version. In the book, he hears a voice commanding him to get out and later becomes ill, eventually giving up on helping the family. The films, however, escalate the horror, showing him being attacked by swarms of supernatural flies and even going blind. Regardless of these differences, one chilling fact remains: an entire family was murdered in that house. Yet despite the Lutz family's claims of paranormal experiences in 1975, no other owners have reported hauntings since. According to the Washington Post and real estate firm Coldwell Banker, Harbor Light, 4 different families have lived in the house after the Lutzes. A previous owner even had the address changed to avoid unwanted attention. The last time the house went up for sale was in the summer of 2016, and it was sold in February 2017 for just over $600,000, significantly less than the $950,000 it was purchased for in 2010. As for the real murders that took place, while Butch was eventually found dead in his prison cell, there are countless versions of events and interviews he gave before his death. In an interview from 1986, Butch claimed that his sister Dawn killed their father, and that their mother killed his siblings before he killed her. He later filed a motion in 1990 stating that Dawn and an unknown assailant were the real killers, that he only shot Dawn by accident during a struggle. Despite his shifting stories, his claims were always met with skepticism. In 2000, he spoke with author R.I. Auna, asserting that his parents plotted to kill him, which led him to join forces with Dawn and others in desperation. Butch's narrative continued to evolve, becoming increasingly distant with details about the events and unreliable witnesses. His claims, including involvement from his wife Geraldine Gates, only deepened the mystery, with authorities and experts disproving many of his assertions. Now, it's easy to lean toward the idea that Butch was simply a psychopath driven by childhood trauma or addiction, who saw no problem in killing his family. However, if the lingering souls of his victims did haunt the Lutz family, we can only hope they found justice and peace. The saga of the DeFeo family in the house at 112 Ocean Avenue remains one of the most haunting and enigmatic chapters in American crime and lore. From Ronald Butch's cold-blooded slaughter of his family in 1974 to the Lutz family's harrowing 28-day ordeal a year later, the Amityville horror transcends a mere murder case, weaving a tapestry of trauma, mystery, and supernatural intrigue. Butch's shifting confessions and unrepentant nature leave us questioning whether his actions stem from a fractured mind or something darker, while the Lutz's flight from inexplicable terror suggests the house itself may hold echoes of its violent past. Decades later, with Butch gone and the house standing quietly under new ownership, its legacy endures, immortalized in books and films, yet shrouded in doubt. Whether driven by human evil or lingering spirits, the tragedy of Amityville serves as a chilling reminder of the shadows that can lurk within families and homes, leaving us to wonder where the line between reality and nightmare truly lies. Jessica Edens was born on January 22, 1981, in a small suburb of New York State, USA. She came from a large family, with a sister named Diane and 2 half-brothers, Nathan and Adam. Jessica spent her early years surrounded by loving parents and siblings, with whom she developed warm relationships. She didn't have outstanding academic success but was always creative, dreaming of becoming a photographer. When her parents recognized this passion, they bought her an amateur camera, which she carried everywhere. She took pictures of people, nature, cities, and architecture, anything that caught her attention. Her work was admired and praised. During her teenage years, Jessica actively pursued this passion and mastered the craft. She began to shoot weddings and various events, initially for free, then for a small fee. This allowed her to earn enough money for her own needs, and the idea of building a real business became increasingly appealing. Jessica's personal life was also progressing. She was sociable, active, attractive, and always attracted a lot of attention. On November 19, 2007, she gave birth to a son named Hayden King. Jessica became pregnant during a rapidly developing relationship with a young man, but the love between them faded quickly, and they broke up before Hayden was born. However, Jessica remained optimistic and maintained friendly relations with the child's biological father, allowing him to communicate with Hayden. Jessica was determined to provide everything her child needed, regardless of whether she had a partner or was raising him as a single mother. Fortunately, she did not have to be alone for long. In 2008, Jessica met a man named Benjamin Edens. They quickly found common ground, grew closer, and within a few meetings, they could not imagine their lives without each other. They was in no hurry to officially register their marriage, as both were creative individuals who understood each other well. After a few months, they moved in together, and Jessica began to contemplate having more children. After a while, they officially got married in 2010. Shortly thereafter, they decided to move to a new large house located in a small, cozy town in Easley, South Carolina, which was ideal for a quiet family life. Their family relationships flourished, and Jessica was convinced she had found the man of her dreams, a feeling that was mutual. 2 years later, on July 19, 2012, they welcomed a daughter named Harper Edens. Jessica believes this further strengthens her relationship with Benjamin. He was a wonderful father who spent all his free time with Harper. He also became so close to Hayden that the boy did not suspect Benjamin was not his biological father. By 2017, Hayden was in the 4th grade, while his younger sister Harper was about to start 1st grade in the fall. This was an exciting milestone. From the outside, Jessica's family appeared perfect. She had 2 children, a beloved job, and a husband whom she described to everyone as the best person. Her eldest child was a good student, and the family expected the same from Harper. Jessica's passion for photography thrived, but when she had her daughter, she decided to take a break and become a housewife, stepping back from her small but successful photo business. However, as Harper grew more independent, Jessica returned to attending various events to conduct professional photography. To simplify her client search, she created a website where she introduced herself as a photographer from Greenville. Jessica described her life as perfect, but, as often happens, things were exaggerated. Behind the facade of love and understanding, difficulties began to arise in the marriage. Over time, Benjamin's feelings cooled, and tension accumulated between them. Jessica wanted to understand what was happening as she began to notice uncharacteristic behaviors in her husband. He would come home from work, immediately run into the shower without even saying hello to his wife and children, as if he were trying to hide something. More and more often, he stayed at work much longer than his shift lasted, citing overtime and global projects that no one could confirm. He began to actively engage in sports, carefully monitored his appearance, and switched to healthy eating. All this could look like ordinary healthy habits that people develop with age, but not with Jessica. She began to suspect Benjamin of cheating. Quickly, a suitable candidate for an affair appeared. A young, attractive woman had recently started at her husband's workplace. This woman's name was Meredith Rahm. She was born on October 29, 1988, in Collierville, Tennessee. In Jessica's opinion, it was on Meredith that her husband had set his eyes. In the early years of Meredith's life, her parents divorced, and her mother quickly found a new man and remarried, so Meredith had a stepfather named Carlton Chambers. He was a worthy person and became like a second father to her. The family in which she grew up was friendly and loving. Meredith had a younger sister named Brittany Rowell. She dedicated herself to her studies from an early age and was focused on career success. She studied well and was creative, like Jessica, but family and children were of little interest to her. In 2009, she graduated from the University of Memphis with a bachelor's degree in international business. After gaining some necessary experience, she moved to Greenville. Meredith was very independent and self-confident, which immediately caught Benjamin's eye. By the time they met, Meredith had started working at the same company as Benjamin. In fact, Jessica's suspicions were justified. Immediately after meeting Meredith, her husband became attracted to her. Their feelings come from both sides. They started dating in secret, and their affair continued for a year. Now, Benjamin finally realized that he wanted to be with his young mistress and wanted to break up with Jessica, but he didn't know how to approach the issue. He was afraid of offending his wife and wanted to avoid the difficulties of the divorce process. For a long time, Benjamin was torn between his family and his mistress. His wife's suspicions only aggravated the situation. The more accusations she made, the more inevitable the breakup felt, which provoked constant quarrels. Jessica did not trust her husband and wanted to find out what was going on. He tried to distance himself, but this could not go on forever. It was time to tell the truth, but Benjamin could not bring himself to do it. Instead of confessing, he decided to move out on far-fetched grounds, citing constant pressure from his wife. On April 11, 2017, Benjamin packed his things and moved from the shared family home to a rented apartment. At least that is what he initially told his wife. Jessica kept hoping that these were only temporary difficulties that many people experience, and that their marriage would be saved. She believed she could convince her husband to return to her and their children. Benjamin tried to avoid the topic of separation altogether, reluctantly answered calls and messages, which only offended her more. The betrayal was of such a magnitude that she could not forgive it. She was angry, and her hopes for a family reunion were shattered. But most of all, she was furious that Benjamin simply ignored her. As the persecution began, Jessica spread various damaging facts about Meredith on all social networks and on any sites where she could post information, exposing her as the homewrecker and her husband as a cheater. Jessica continued to communicate regularly with Benjamin, trying to win him back. Instead, he finally decided to file for divorce. Telling Jessica this provoked even more anger from her, and she now decided to annoy him as much as possible. She knew how much Benjamin loved their daughter Harper, so she sought sole custody of the girl. He had always been a caring father and loved the children, including Hayden. Therefore, he was against such a decision. Benjamin wanted to maintain the right to communicate with the children. He did not want to sit idly by. He hoped to smooth over the conflict and therefore proposed joint custody. Jessica was adamant. Against this backdrop, a serious custody battle began, and tensions escalated. Realizing that it would not be possible to agree amicably, Benjamin went to court on July 11th. He wanted to gain an advantage and testified under oath that Jessica was using the children as a weapon of revenge. By this point, Jessica had completely prevented meetings and communication between the children with their father, not even allowing contact through social networks and mobile phones. Everything was under her total control. Benjamin was afraid she could go too far. Simultaneously, Jessica intensified her harassment of Benjamin and Meredith. She continued to post not just hateful words toward Meredith on social media but also used graphic photos and other offensive captions. Previously, Jessica had tried to portray Benjamin's mistress as a family destroyer. Now, even more disturbing captions began to appear. She claimed that Meredith would get what she deserved, though she never specified what she meant. Meredith, the target of the harassment, began to fear that all of this could be dangerous. However, Benjamin insisted that Jessica had no history of violence, so he believed the situation would gradually settle down. He tried not to provoke her further, but it had little effect. The situation only worsened. When Jessica learned about the filing of a joint custody application by her husband, she was furious. Benjamin had always been a decent person, a valuable employee who earned a good salary and had no bad habits or addictions, so there were no serious grounds for denying him custody or terminating his contact with the children. He simply wanted to see them. Now that he had received the right to visit, which Jessica could not oppose. Due to the impossibility of taking revenge, she began to come up with more sophisticated ways to annoy him. Every short communication with Benjamin ended in conflicts and accusations. It was even more annoying to her that the mistress would be in contact with the children. During this period, Benjamin and Meredith regularly contacted the police to complain about Jessica's behavior. In particular, Meredith could no longer tolerate the publications that Jessica made about her daily on various social networks. She starts having problems at work when Jessica tries to turn things around her. Benjamin tried to prove that Jessica's behavior was stalking and very disturbing. Worse, he began receiving frightening messages from Jessica, all concerning the children. It seemed she was trying to intimidate him with ambiguous phrases, and he worried that his daughter might be in danger. In July 2017, after a court meeting, he called the police to check on the welfare of the children at Jessica's house. He described the situation in detail. He felt powerless since Jessica still interfered with the meetings, and he did not want to use force, fearing she would use this in court against him to strip him of his joint custody rights. The officers who responded reported that everything was fine, but the anxiety from the threats continued to grow. On July 12, they discussed joint custody again. All attempts by Jessica to prevent this were unsuccessful, making her even more furious. During the day, Benjamin begins to receive more disturbing messages from his ex-wife. It was obvious to her that there was no legal way to limit the children's communication with their father, so she tried to irritate him further with her frightening messages. Benjamin contacted the police again and asked the patrol officers to go to the family home to check on the children's well-being. When the officers arrived, they again did not see anything suspicious. The report compiled by the patrolman stated that everything was fine, the family seemed normal, Jessica behaved calmly, and her son and daughter were in a good mood while watching a movie when the officers arrived. At that moment, Jessica insisted that Harper call Benjamin, realizing that he had called the police. All of this became part of her insidious plan to expose him as a liar. While the officer was in the house, he discussed the potential resumption of relations with Benjamin. Jessica denied wanting to reconcile, calling him a traitor who had cheated for a whole year. She couldn't forgive him and intended to use this in court to achieve sole custody of their daughter. She didn't want him in the children's lives. While the officer was filling out the report, Jessica began insisting that Benjamin and Meredith were very dangerous people, especially to the children. She claimed to have suffered from their behavior since the divorce process began and insisted that they were trying to portray her in a bad light. Jessica wanted to obtain a restraining order against them. The patrolman informed Jessica that, in order to get a restraining order, she would have to go through the court process after filing a report. After saying goodbye to the officers, she promised to file a statement in person soon, but that was not destined to happen. The next day, while Jessica's family was out of town, she went to her parents' house early in the morning and took a .40 caliber pistol that they used for self-defense. When relatives heard about this, Jessica warned her father about the need for a weapon, and he was not against it. They did not suspect the scale of the persecution that Jessica had arranged. She skillfully lied, making Benjamin look worse and referring to the persecution from him, that the danger emanating from her ex. Jessica claimed that she could not feel calm at home, she was simply afraid to be left alone with her two children. They were easily convinced that Benjamin and Meredith posed a threat, including to the children, and that the weapon would help protect them from what she described as extremely harmful communication. All of this sounded plausible, therefore, her parents had no problem with her needing the weapon for a while. Jessica planned to keep the gun in the house while the divorce process was ongoing. Jessica then sent text messages filled with accusations, now targeting everyone who knew Meredith. She managed to find information about the family and friends of Meredith, copying the messages to everyone, then telling them how Meredith had stolen her husband, destroyed her family, and was now trying to take the children. Jessica obtained the phone numbers of at least 5 friends of family members on social media. It seems she was immersed in this all day, displaying behavior that resembled madness. She even personally called several people, relaying her story over her mobile phone. Some of Jessica's acquaintances became disappointed in her decency, causing real damage to her reputation. Benjamin also received even more terrifying messages. Jessica openly accused and intimidated him, stating that he would not receive anything, he would not gain access to Meredith and the children. Jessica wrote that because of his actions, he would have no chance of getting any of it, as she would not allow him to enjoy life after what he had done. Benjamin was extremely worried about this information and began to send Jessica message after message, trying to understand what she meant. However, she simply ignored all his questions, which only increased Benjamin's anxiety. He expressed his willingness to go to court for an emergency hearing regarding joint custody of the children, even threatened to try to take the children from her if she did not calm down. Finally, Jessica responded with a short message, "Your life will soon be better." Benjamin was sure that she was just mocking him and enjoying this situation. Jessica claimed that it was the last day she would experience pain, after which she ignored any attempts by Benjamin to contact her. On the morning of July 13, 2017, Jessica wrote to Benjamin again. She offered to meet so that Benjamin could answer some questions. However, Benjamin found everything very suspicious and hesitated to attend the meeting. He didn't suspect that this could turn out to be a fatal mistake. Benjamin tried to get her to talk on the phone to understand what she needed and why they couldn't discuss it without a meeting, but this only made Jessica even angrier. At 4:41 p.m., he received another message in which Jessica complained that she was tired of this bullying that never meant anything to Benjamin. In reality, old accusations and the most frightening threats she had ever voiced since the breakup emerged. Jessica's behavior was so alarming that Benjamin contacted her mother to discuss the situation, suspecting that Jessica was having a breakdown. He feared she could not control herself, might pose a danger to herself and the children. At that time, he was at work and could not leave. He did not suspect that while he was talking to Jessica's mother, Jessica was already driving to his apartment with bad intentions. At about 5 p.m., Jessica parked her car near the complex where Benjamin and Meredith lived. In the parking lot, Jessica saw Meredith, who had just returned from work and was sitting in her car, distracted by the mail on her mobile phone. Jessica approached her, pointed a gun, and shot through the glass, instantly killing her rival, whom she considered the cause of all her troubles. All this happened in broad daylight. As people were returning from work, the noise attracted numerous witnesses. After the incident, people saw Jessica get into her car and drive away. Neighbors contacted the police, reporting this and clarifying one frightening detail. At that time, there were 2 children in the car with the shooter. Witnesses described the shooter, and the police understood who they were talking about. They assumed that Benjamin was in danger. Jessica had enough time to act, but she was not going to go to Benjamin's workplace. Instead, she devised something much more sophisticated and stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. While the authorities were still looking for her in the city and were awaiting Benjamin's arrival at work, Jessica called Benjamin, told him that everyone he loved had left and that she would be next. Then Jessica hung up. It was the last call she made. Police eventually traced the call and went to Easley, 7 miles from the Benjamin home, where they saw her Jeep. The doors of the car were locked from the inside, and the engine was still running. Inside, they found 3 bodies, 2 children and Jessica herself, who was 36 years old. Jessica had persistently called Benjamin in hopes of meeting with him, perhaps intending him to be her first victim. However, he seemed to sense danger and avoided contact as much as possible, often opting to respond via a message on a messaging app. When she received a refusal, she flared up in anger and attacked Meredith, after which Jessica returned home. Near her house, she called Benjamin again. After a meaningless conversation, Jessica first attacked her 5-year-old daughter, then her 9-year-old son, after which she turned the gun on herself. Jessica used the same gun that she had borrowed from her parents on July 11th. During the investigation, detectives found out that Benjamin had been trying to obtain a restraining order against Jessica. He had filed for joint custody on the same day and had communicated with the police officer who came to check on the children. Jessica left 4 suicide notes, 1 for her mother, 1 for her father, 1 for her son's father, and 1 for her husband. In these notes, she expressed her love for her family and her regret for the pain her actions would cause them. Jessica insisted that she could no longer live with these feelings and believed that her children would also suffer without her, so she decided to take not only her life but theirs as well. In the letter to her son's father, she expressed gratitude for giving her her first child and apologized for the pain she had caused. Considering the content of these notes, the police investigated suspicions of domestic violence against the children. Judging by what Jessica wrote, it was possible she had harmed them as a way of exacting revenge on her unfaithful husband. However, nothing like this could be confirmed. As for the last note left by Jessica to Benjamin, it contained several short phrases in which she wished that Benjamin would experience the pain from his cruel act for the rest of his life. The note also stated that he would not be able to hurt them anymore. Among all the individuals involved in this case, Benjamin was the only survivor. The note turned out to be prophetic. Even to this day, he continues to live with the pain of losing his loved ones. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. Sophie Bouniel was born on July 28, 1957, in Paris, France. She grew up in a renowned and wealthy family, with significant influence in the fashion and film industries. Sophie was artistic, talented, and assertive, which led her to a successful career as a film producer, making her a recognizable face and a symbol of success in the country. However, Sophie still prioritized her personal life and family happiness. In 1991, she married film producer Daniel Toscan du Plantier, and since then, she has been known as Sophie Toscan du Plantier. Their meeting was serendipitous, as both were entrenched in the film industry and matched each other's stature. They became symbols of luxury and wealth during that period, and their marriage attracted significant attention from the media. As both continued to thrive in their careers, they moved into a lavish mansion with Sophie's son from her first marriage. Sophie is a strong and energetic person, capable of resolutely defending her beliefs and continuously pursuing her dreams. Those close to her know that she is also a gentle, kind, and loving mother. The focus of her life was her son, Pierre-Louis Baudy. Furthermore, Sophie takes care of her image as a glamorous and fashionable woman, often attracting the attention of the media and reporters in the entertainment industry. As Sophie aged, she began to desire greater privacy, tranquility, and a family life away from the relentless scrutiny of admirers and strangers. In the early 90s, she started spending more time at her home in the rural area of Dunmanus West, near Cork, Ireland, a place she had enjoyed visiting as a child. Cork had become a popular retreat for affluent artists and writers drawn to its picturesque scenery. The hustle and bustle of Paris made her feel tired, so she decided to choose to live in this quiet and cozy place. In 1993, she purchased a cottage there. Unlike the villas she was accustomed to, this cottage posed some challenges, as it was in a remote area that was not always easy to access. However, for Sophie, the seclusion and peace it promised made it worth it. Even after she arrived, she faced issues with electricity and heating, which were often unreliable. Despite these difficulties, they did not significantly impact her ability to relax. Sophie was drawn to the local landscapes and the charm of the province because they helped her restore her emotional strength and inspired fond memories of her carefree childhood. After a long time away, she returned and was captivated by the beauty of nature, feeling as if she had fallen in love with it all over again. From then on, she chose to focus on the positives and disregard any inconveniences. Sophie typically spent her summers there but always returned to Paris, where she viewed this time as a period of spiritual and emotional renewal. Sophie usually goes there alone. The same thing happened in December 1996, when she was 39 years old, and she decided to visit Ireland to rejuvenate herself and read movie scripts before the new year. Arriving alone, she settled into her home in a quiet neighborhood. While she enjoyed her solitude, she wasn't a recluse. She interacted with her neighbors and childhood friends living nearby, was often seen around town. Sophie had established friendly relationships with many locals and always treated them as equals. Because of this, people didn't see her as just a woman from Bohemian Paris but rather as the familiar girl they remembered from their hometown. She engaged in pleasant conversations, deliberately steering clear of work and personal topics to avoid drawing attention and gossip. Before Christmas, a neighbor visited Sophie at her home. On December 23, 1996, around 10 a.m., she intended to chat about holiday plans and enjoy a cup of tea. However, instead of a friendly visit, she discovered a lifeless woman lying in the mud in front of the house. Alarmed, she immediately called the police to report a body near Sophie's residence. The condition of the body was so severe that she wasn't even sure it was Sophie. When the Irish police arrived, they encountered a gruesome scene. The woman's head was so badly damaged that she was unrecognizable, but she was confirmed to be Sophie Toscan du Plantier. At the time of her death, she was still wearing her nightgown and had on boots. The bedding in her bedroom was disheveled, suggesting that she had been awakened suddenly during the night or early morning and hurried outside, putting on her street shoes in the process. Nearby, authorities discovered a large concrete block covered in blood, which is believed to be the murder weapon. Bloody footprints led away from the scene towards the front gate, where the keys were still in the lock. Inside the house, 2 wine glasses were found in the dish drainer, leading detectives to speculate that the attack likely occurred outdoors, as there were no signs of a struggle indoors. Local police were not accustomed to dealing with such severe crimes in the area. The local precinct was small and lacked experienced investigators, so they had to wait for forensic experts from a larger city to arrive. These experts needed to thoroughly examine the crime scene in Sophie's body. They arrived just 1 day later, but during that time, Sophie's body remained at the outdoor scene. The weather was rainy and cold, and they could only cover her with plastic bags. Unfortunately, the damp conditions ruined some critical evidence. Once the investigation officially began, the police quickly noticed signs of a struggle on Sophie's hands. However, the passage of time made it difficult to evaluate these signs accurately. Most of the blood had been washed away by the rain, leaving investigators with very little evidence to work with. Forensic experts were engaged in reconstructing the incident that led to Sophie's death. It became clear that she died from blunt force trauma to the head. Some faint traces of blood were discovered on the gate and the entrance, but much of it had also been compromised by rain. Since Sophie was wearing boots and the blood was primarily found on the street side, investigators believed the attack likely began there. No signs of a struggle were found inside the house, and although 2 glasses of wine were found in the dish drainer, they could not be considered reliable evidence since they were already clean. It was uncertain when those glasses were used, as Sophie may have used them at different times by herself. Several DNA samples were collected from the crime scene, but in 1996, testing in profile comparison technology was very limited. This crucial evidence did not lead to any useful information. However, it was preserved in the archives. Detectives attempted to piece together the timeline of Sophie's activities since her arrival in Ireland. They discovered that she had arrived on December 21st. That same day, she was seen shopping at a grocery store, appearing relaxed while casually exploring the area. Sophie engaged in friendly conversations with several locals who were familiar with her. One store owner recalled that a man in a black coat and hat entered the store shortly after Sophie. Witnesses noted that this man appeared to be watching her and left as soon as she did, suggesting he might have been following her. It was obvious to those who were present that he showed no interest in shopping, as he didn't buy anything. No one else seemed to notice this suspicious individual on December 21st. On December 22nd, Sophie went for a walk along a path leading to a nearby castle perched on a rocky ledge. She took in the views from the observation deck before walking back to the city. She stopped by a local pub, where she ordered tea and chatted with some regular patrons. Eventually, Sophie returned to her home and did not go out again until late at night when she contacted her husband, Daniel, who was in Paris. This information helped investigators establish the timeline of the incident. Sophie's body was discovered at 10 a.m. the following morning, suggesting the attack occurred sometime between midnight and that time. Given the nature of the crime, investigators believed the killer was likely someone from Sophie's close circle, as is often the case in similar situations. The first suspect was Sophie's husband, Daniel. There were whispers that their marriage was struggling. As the police delved deeper into their family dynamics, they uncovered that the strain was due to Daniel's ongoing infidelity. Sophie had expressed her desire to end the relationship even before her trip to Ireland, viewing the getaway as a chance to relieve stress before the separation. Since both individuals were prominent and wealthy, the divorce would likely have been complex and highly publicized. Financial motivations can often lead to violent acts. However, Daniel was quickly cleared as a suspect when he claimed he was in France at the time of the murder, a claim corroborated by numerous witnesses, providing him with a solid alibi. The situation was further complicated by the fact that the murder occurred in a town with an insufficient police force, leaving them lacking the resources needed for a thorough investigation. This resulted in delays while they sifted through various theories and false claims. At this point, investigators considered the possibility that the murderer was familiar with both the victim, Sophie, and the local area, as the crime was committed without attracting attention. This explained the absence of outcry during the incident, even from neighborhood dogs, who would have recognized the perpetrator's scent but may not have reacted. Subsequently, detectives focused their attention on a man named Ian Kenneth Bailey. Ian was born in Manchester in 1957 and had a troubled past, as well as a troubled reputation. He started his career as a freelance journalist, owned a business, and held various jobs before moving to Ireland in 1991. At the time of the murder, Ian was living with his girlfriend and had experienced run-ins with local law enforcement. In 1991, Ian started a business but soon faced serious issues. He became involved in several troubling incidents after assaulting his business partner. Conflicts with authorities resulted in his conviction for assault later that year, and he spent some time in jail. Ian had a history with local police due to his temper and aggressive behavior, including previous domestic violence incidents that even led to his partner being hospitalized, although he was not jailed for those cases. Ian underwent a psychiatric evaluation, which revealed he had a narcissistic personality disorder. He was noted to be impulsive and cruel, with indications of various mental health issues. Experts described him as someone with very high self-esteem and a problem with alcohol, contributing to his unpredictable and violent outbursts. He claimed that his behavior was partly due to a difficult divorce that had occurred shortly before he moved to West Cork. There were additional reasons to consider him a suspect. His house was close to Sophie's, making it easy for him to approach her without being noticed. At that time, Ian was living with his girlfriend, Catherine Jules Thomas, who was also a local resident. Remarkably, on December 23rd, shortly after Sophie's body was discovered, they were among the first to arrive at the crime scene and possessed knowledge of many details about the crime. Catherine and Ian attempted to gather more information from the police to create a report. Ian claimed to be an independent journalist looking for a story, but he was denied access to the crime scene. The police noted that they were very insistent, even entering the house without permission. Upon checking his background, it became clear that he had a criminal history, raising doubts about his true identity as a reporter. Despite the police's objections, Ian managed to publish several negative articles. His aggressive pursuit of information only deepened the police's suspicions about him. The articles were filled with inappropriate details and speculation about Sophie's personal life, shocking her relatives with their lack of ethics and Ian's cynicism. Following the publication of these articles, a wave of public outrage ensued. Sophie's relatives publicly rejected Ian's claims by appearing on television. They believed that he was trying to tarnish Sophie's name for the sake of fame and profit. They agreed with law enforcement that Ian might be involved and regarded him with skepticism. When questioned by the police, Ian denied ever knowing Sophie. However, close friends of Sophie, who had known her since childhood, were convinced that Ian was connected to the crime. The media contributed to this belief by suggesting that Ian was involved in her death. Despite this, Ian maintained his innocence, citing his notes and a mysterious informant who allegedly provided him with crucial information, although he refused to reveal this person's identity. In Ian's writings, he not only focused on Sophie but also on a criminal within her circle of friends, who had hired a hitman. He suspected that this individual could be one of Sophie's ex-lovers or even her husband, who was in the process of divorcing her. While they were busy disputing these claims, a significant anonymous tip came in from a local resident. The witness reported seeing an unknown man near Sophie's house around 3 a.m. on December 23rd. The description of this man matched the appearance of a man that a local shop owner had seen chasing Sophie. Strangely, this anonymous witness provided a detailed and accurate description that matched Ian Kenneth Bailey's appearance exactly. A few days later, he was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. Once there, He acted very nervously, created a scene, and made threats regarding the situation. Detectives quickly noticed suspicious scratches on his face and hands. When questioned about them, he claimed that he had been hurt by a Christmas tree that fell while he was cutting it down in the forest. Police were skeptical of Ian's explanation and took photos of the scratches, which only made him more agitated. Although his behavior seemed overly aggressive, he attributed it to his mental health issues. He denied knowing Sophie and insisted on his own theory, suggesting that one of her former partners might have hired someone to kill her. He loudly claimed that it was Daniel, not him, who should be investigated. Authorities believed that the criminal was a local who knew the area well, which explained how he could get to Sophie's house without leaving any evidence. Ian argued that the forensic team took too long to arrive at the crime scene, allowing rain to wash away any potential evidence, and insisted that being a local was irrelevant. He criticized the initial investigation as negligent and accused the police of attempting to pin the blame on him. Detectives interviewed Ian's friends, who reported seeing him at a local pub the night before the crime. Ian had no scratches on his face, making it improbable that he ventured into the forest at night to retrieve a Christmas tree after leaving the bar. Despite numerous objections, he was arrested on February 10, 1997, after new information emerged. Another key witness, Ian's ex-wife Jules Thomas, provided a statement. She was very concerned about potential charges from the police, which prompted her to speak up. She confirmed that she indeed met Sophie in the store on December 21, 1996. Ian learned about Sophie's arrival and went to find her to get a story. Jules also suggested that he might have followed Sophie to an observation deck on the 22nd, where she went to admire the castle. On that same day, when Ian returned, he acted very mysteriously and strangely, even commenting that something terrible might happen in the city that night. He never clarified what had made him anxious. Later that evening, Ian went out for a walk, but when he returned, he left again, only to come back an hour later. He assumed Jules was asleep, but she woke up several times throughout the night and did not find him at home. Finally, Ian confessed that he had gone to the nearby studio to work until 9 a.m. The inconsistencies in his statements and Jules's admissions led to his detention. However, within 12 hours, no solid evidence was found linking him to the murder. Under Irish law, if there is insufficient evidence to convict a suspect within 12 hours of arrest, the suspect must be released. As a result, he was released due to insufficient evidence. Despite being a prime suspect, law enforcement had no choice but to let him go. However, public suspicion towards him increased. Ian's behavior became increasingly erratic, which he attributed to mental health issues. The stress of being implicated as a possible murderer took a toll on his well-being, and he began experiencing hallucinations. He also tried to blame the police for defaming him, but his efforts were unsuccessful. The rumors he spread began to sound nonsensical. On January 27, 1998, they decided to arrest Ian again. He maintained his innocence and argued that the police had no evidence against him. Detectives pointed to the only DNA evidence found at the crime scene, which did not belong to Sophie. However, it was of poor quality due to contamination from prolonged exposure to the elements. This made it impossible to definitively link Ian to the murder, creating a significant hurdle for the investigation. Under Irish law, an individual can only be arrested twice without being charged for a crime. Ian maintained his innocence throughout the process. During his second arrest, authorities had just 12 hours to establish his involvement in the murder. He felt pressure to confess, which only fueled his anger. He sought to leverage his connections in journalism to discredit the local police, claiming that authorities were attempting to make him a scapegoat. Detectives believed Ian was simply aware of his legal rights and was stalling. Despite public suspicion of his guilt, he attributed his unusual interest in the case to his work as a journalist, stating that he was only pursuing a sensational story. This explained his presence while Sophie was alive. The police could not find any evidence against him, and he was released, leading to a standstill in the investigation. In 2003, Ian sued several news organizations for libel, as his connection to the murder had never been established. He sought to clear his name through legal action against the media. During the trial, multiple witnesses testified against him, claiming to have seen him on the day of Sophie's death. The most significant testimony came from an anonymous witness who reported seeing Ian near Sophie's house at night and accused him of lying. Jules Thomas, speaking for the prosecution, described Ian as rude and unstable, suggesting that he might be capable of violence. Nevertheless, the Irish authorities maintained that they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. No conclusive evidence was found, and the DNA samples collected could not be fully analyzed, leaving officials constrained by the law. Sophie's family was deeply disappointed by the lack of progress in the investigation into her death. Relatives, including her husband, viewed the police's response as inadequate. In 2008, the family sought justice by appealing to the French court for an investigation but faced numerous obstacles. The key witness in the case later revealed that he had falsely accused journalist Ian out of fear of the police. After this revelation, Ian decided to take legal action against the Irish government for wrongful prosecution. His lawyer based their strategy on the witness's retraction of his statement. However, in 2019, a court in France began the trial without Ian's participation. Under French law, if a French citizen is killed abroad, the trial can take place in France. About 30 witnesses were summoned to testify. As a result of the proceedings, the court convicted Ian Kenneth Bailey of murder and sentenced him to 25 years in prison. However, the Irish Supreme Court refused to extradite him, arguing that the court's decision was flawed due to a lack of sufficient evidence. Consequently, Ian remained in Ireland, avoiding extradition and any legal consequences there. In 2022, a significant development occurred when the Irish and French judicial systems collaborated to investigate Sophie's murder. They reviewed all the case materials and re-examined the evidence, despite some being lost or damaged. There were suggestions that an accomplice of Daniel might have been involved, and Ian's account could have shed light on the truth. Unfortunately, Ian Kenneth Bailey passed away from cardiac arrest in January 2024 before he could learn the outcome of the investigation. The police searched his apartment, hoping to gather DNA samples for comparison with evidence collected during the original investigation in the 1990s. With advancements in DNA profiling and analysis, there was a renewed opportunity to uncover the truth about what happened. Nearly 30 years had passed since Sophie's death, and there was finally hope for answers. However, none had emerged yet. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Michelle Lowe. In the San Diego, California area, Michelle Lowe lived with her family, which included her parents, her brother Michael. The house was always full of life and laughter. Michelle's mother worked as a nurse and inspired her daughter to follow in her footsteps. After her mother died, Michelle decided to finish what her mother had started and see it through to the end. She became a source of support for her family, learning to drive, cooking, and always giving advice. Michelle is a nursing student at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland and is interning at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hayward. On May 27, 2011, after a long shift at the hospital, Michelle decided to quickly run to her car in the parking lot to get something. However, on her way to the car, she suddenly stopped, changed direction, and a few minutes later, a white Honda CR-V quickly drove out of the parking lot. When they began gathering all the students towards the end of her shift, Michelle was nowhere to be seen. Her personal belongings were left in the break room, her phone was not answering. This behavior was completely unlike her, and her instructor suspected something was wrong, so they immediately called the police. The next morning, 10 hours after Michelle's disappearance, there was still no news of her. Her brother and other relatives began searching for her, joining forces with the police and volunteers. Michelle's friends and colleagues came to the police station, clearly concerned about her disappearance. They insisted that her behavior had been too strange and that no one was willing to leave before a full investigation began. The officers quickly realized how serious the situation was. Traces of blood were found in the parking lot where her Honda had been parked. At about 9 a.m., they found her Honda CR-V itself. It was locked and neatly parked in a visitor spot near an apartment building just a kilometer from the hospital. Inside the car were her laptop and someone else's student ID from Sal Merritt University, which lay on the back seat. Michelle had no connection to the owner of the ID, and it remained unclear why it was there. Later, it was discovered that the card had been stolen a couple of days before Michelle's disappearance. Most likely, the attacker had stolen the ID to gain access to the building and possibly lured Michelle to the parking lot before disappearing with her in her own car. Detectives immediately understood that this was not the work of a random criminal, but someone who knew her schedule well. The theory that someone had simply attacked her randomly in the parking lot seemed unlikely. Hospital records showed that 30 minutes after Michelle walked into the parking lot, the emergency room received a call. At 7:30 p.m., the emergency department received a call. The caller introduced herself as Michelle and asked to speak to the teacher. The nurse who answered the call informed the caller that she would need to transfer the call to another department, but the caller insisted that the nurse not do so. She mentioned that she just wanted the teacher to know that Michelle had called to inform her that Michelle would not be able to come back that night because she had received a message that her father had had a heart attack. When Michelle's car was being towed away for further examination, her brother Michael unexpectedly received a message from her phone, "I'm fine." Then another message came, "I'm not missing. The phone is glitching and has erased all data." These messages drained the battery. Shortly afterward, friends began receiving strange messages, one after another, claiming that she had a flat tire, that she was back in Reno, that she needed a break from social media, and that she was not feeling well and wanted to rest. Michelle's ex-boyfriend noticed the activity on her phone and immediately wrote to her, but the reply was, "Who is this?" By May 31st, the reward for information on Michelle's whereabouts had increased to $20,000, and after a few days, it reached almost $100,000. The family hired a private detective, and more than 100 volunteers joined the search, dividing into 14 teams to cover an area of several kilometers. The reward continued to grow. During the investigation into Michelle's relationships, one interesting detail emerged. She had problems with an old friend named Giselle Daiwag Esteban. The girls had been close for many years and even went to college together. Giselle was dating a man named Scott, and they had a 6-year-old daughter. However, their relationship had ended on a bad note, which sparked the issues between Michelle and Giselle. Long before Giselle and Scott started dating, Michelle had gone on a couple of dates with Scott but quickly realized that they were better suited as friends. There was never any romance or intimacy between them. Despite this, Giselle became obsessively jealous. Her behavior grew increasingly strange, and her relationship with Michelle began to deteriorate. Michelle continued to be friends with Scott and refused to stop communicating with him just because Giselle wanted her to. She ignored Giselle's strange and obsessive claims. When detectives came to Giselle to ask her a few questions, she did not hide her obvious antipathy towards Michelle and didn't even try to pretend otherwise. Giselle asserting that she had long asked Michelle to stay away from her daughter and to stop communicating with their mutual friends. She described their relationship as torment, calling Michelle a best friend who cheated on her with her ex-fiancé. The detectives then found Scott, who honestly shared his version of events. They noticed that he was sincerely worried and even participated in the search for Michelle, attending meetings and vigils organized in her honor. Scott shared how Giselle behaved towards him and his family. At some point, when their relationship reached another crisis, he tried to improve his relationship with Giselle for the sake of their daughter. However, these attempts always ended in failure. He showed the detectives a long correspondence with Giselle, where she constantly mentioned Michelle and wrote increasingly aggressive messages, such as, "I hope you find that nasty." Giselle accused Michelle of destroying their family and threatened that she would soon become unnecessary. Giselle even sent messages directly to Michelle, insulting her and accusing her of ruining her family. Additionally, she followed Michelle to San Diego. Scott also showed the police a recording of one of Giselle's outbursts of rage. In the recording, she was sitting in a car with their daughter in the back seat. Giselle insisted that Scott be honest about Michelle and threatened to kill them both if he lied about his relationship with Michelle. She gave him what she called a last and final warning. Scott stated that Giselle was temporarily placed in a psychiatric clinic where she was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. After that, Giselle continued to come to Scott's house, sometimes even going inside and just sitting in a room until she was noticed. Scott was able to achieve complete custody of their daughter, which further angered Giselle, prompting her to move back to Hayward to be closer to them. Just 3 days before Michelle went missing, Scott filed for a temporary restraining order against Giselle, claiming that she had threatened him and his family. On the same day, he accused Giselle of breaking into his home and into their daughter's room. The police continued to review CCTV footage in the hope of obtaining clear images of Michelle's car. Her brother did not believe that his sister could simply get lost, as she always stayed in touch with the family and even reminded them to call their grandmother on Mother's Day. A reward for any information about Michelle's whereabouts continued to grow, and the search remained active. The police still hoped to find Michelle alive, but the evidence they gathered indicated that their chances were diminishing with each passing day. Their worst fears were confirmed when traces of Michelle's blood were found in her car. They called her family and informed them that the case was no longer being treated as a disappearance. Nevertheless, Michelle's family, determined to continue searching for her and hoping for the best, refused to believe the worst until there was definitive proof. Giselle remained the only suspect in the case, and the police invited her for a full interrogation. By that time, she was already pregnant with her second child. During the conversation, she admitted that she was indeed at the hospital the night Michelle went missing, supposedly for a routine medical examination. When asked about their friendship, Giselle referred to Michelle as her sister but noted that their relationship had deteriorated due to a mistake made by Michelle and Scott. Giselle was released, but the police continued to monitor her, even installing a tracker on her car. Investigators believed she was connected to Michelle's disappearance, but they doubted whether she had acted alone due to her petite stature of only 158 centimeters. In the meantime, the police stepped up their investigation. They questioned Giselle's neighbors, who confirmed that Giselle and Michelle had been friends. Giselle told the press that she had nothing to do with Michelle's disappearance. Even her father joined the search for Michelle, flying in from Vietnam and calling on all local residents to help. An interesting turn of events occurred when Scott called the police and reported that he had found Michelle's phone in the back of his mother's car. Everything indicated that Giselle had planted it, since the tracker on her car showed that she had driven up to Scott's house several times. Security at the medical college where Michelle studied analyzed the data from the stolen student card, which had been used to access the building on May 26, the day before Michelle's disappearance. The cameras recorded Giselle. She had figured out the network technology and gained access to the card, stating that she was interested in enrolling. After receiving the card, Giselle began checking door locks, entering various classrooms, and inspecting the teacher's desk, where she found a student schedule, one of which belonged to Michelle. Now knowing the exact time when Michelle was supposed to be at college the next day, Giselle left the building. Analysis of phone data showed that on the day of her disappearance, Michelle and Giselle were in the same place at the same time. The next day, Giselle went into the Apple store and asked to unlock the iPhone, explaining to the technician that her daughter had accidentally locked her phone. After successfully unlocking it, Giselle left and went to Chuck E. Cheese, where cameras caught her texting. At the same time, Michelle's friends started receiving strange and obviously fake messages, which were confirmed by cell phone towers as coming from Michelle's phone. Despite there being no body, the police already had enough evidence to arrest Giselle Esteban for murder. When she was arrested at the front door of her home, a pair of shoes with Michelle's blood on the soles were also found in Giselle's car, along with a lock of Giselle's hair and her DNA on the steering wheel. Giselle had searched the internet for information on how to cause a heart attack without a trace, follow a person without being caught, and how to pick locks. She also searched for information on toxic gases such as potassium chloride and carbon monoxide. After Michelle went missing, her name was entered into the search bar more than 300 times. 10 days after Giselle's arrest, Michelle's remains were found in a shallow grave in a remote area, about 20 kilometers from Giselle's home. 3 months had passed, and the body was badly decomposed, so the exact cause of death could not be determined. The Alameda County coroner confirmed the identity of the remains in September 2011. Giselle Esteban appeared in court. She pleaded not guilty, claiming that the murder was an accident caused by a moment of anger and that Michelle allegedly provoked her. Her lawyer tried to prove that it was not a premeditated murder but one of chance. However, Giselle herself did not testify and appeared absolutely emotionless in court, without expressing a drop of remorse. Prosecutors assumed that Giselle had planned the attack in advance. She had tracked down Michelle, studied her schedule, waited for her to come out to the parking lot, and then attacked her with a sharp object. This explained the traces of blood, how she could load Michelle's body into the car and take it away. The prosecutor called Giselle a sociopath, noting her coldness and calculation. He emphasized that this was a carefully planned attack on a person who did not even suspect the danger. Giselle Esteban was found guilty of first-degree murder. She did not react to the verdict and left the courtroom in silence. At his sentencing hearing on December 10, Esteban was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the right to parole. Michelle's family was disappointed. They had hoped for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. With such a sentence, they would be forced to attend a parole hearing when she files the appropriate petition. Michelle's brother, Michael, was deeply distressed by the loss. He recalled how his sister had planned to follow in their late mother's footsteps and become a nurse to help people. For the family, the loss of Michelle was immense, and to this day, they hope that justice will prevail. Nothing can bring back their beloved sister and daughter. Michelle's dream of becoming a nurse and following in her mother's footsteps was cut short when Giselle killed her in the parking lot of a Bay Area hospital. It was a fit of jealousy when Giselle mistakenly thought that Michelle had started dating her boyfriend. Michelle's family plans to actively participate in the hearings to remind the judges how cruel this case is and to show how tragic their sister's fate is. The judge noted that in order to be released early, Giselle would have to show sincere remorse, which was not observed from her at the time of the trial. Shortly after her arrest, Giselle gave birth to a boy, who was handed over for adoption. There were rumors that Scott might have been the father, but he denied it, and the real father's name was never revealed. Lee's family continued to volunteer, helping other families dealing with missing loved ones and raising awareness of such cases. Michael said he was sure his sister was now in heaven with their mother, helping him come to terms with his loss and be less afraid of the future. Michelle's father has always been proud of her diligence and busy life but admits that he has never asked her to spend Father's Day with him. Now he regrets and dreams of turning back time, even just for one day, to invite her to enjoy this vacation together. After the trial, Michelle's family did not stop fighting for justice. They decided to direct their pain and anger toward creating an organization in her honor. The Michelle Lowe Foundation has become an important platform for helping families who have lost their loved ones and for those looking for missing relatives. They have organized annual events and fundraisers supporting search services, began advising other families, teaching them how to act correctly in the first hours after the disappearance of loved ones. Every year on Michelle's birthday, her friends, family, and those who were helped by the foundation gather together to remember her bright personality. It became not just a day of mourning but a celebration of her life, a day of support and love. People bring flowers and launch white balloons into the sky, symbolizing hope and memory. Scott, who was drawn into this terrible story, also took part in the work of the foundation. He decided to change his life and devote himself to raising his daughter. He actively participated in activities so that others would not face such a tragedy. As for Giselle, her chances for early release were minimal. Even after a while, her refusal to repent and emotional indifference made her a symbol of the destructive influence of hatred and envy. The story of how jealousy and unfounded suspicions can destroy lives became an important lesson for many, especially for those who suffer from toxic relationships and mistrust. Ultimately, despite all the tragedy, Michelle's light continued to illuminate the path for others. Her story and memory became a source of strength and inspiration, reminding everyone that love and compassion are stronger than hatred and jealousy. Joshua Powell was born on January 20, 1976, in Puyallup, Washington, to Stephen and Terica Powell. He had 4 siblings, Michael, John, Jennifer, and Alina. However, life in the Powell family was far from normal. Their father, Stephen, was controlling and inappropriate, fostering a toxic atmosphere for his children. He shared adult material with his sons and set no boundaries, exposing them to adult content that influenced their behavior. As a teenager, Joshua acted out violently. He once killed his sister's pet gerbil in a fit of anger. He also threatened his mother with a knife during an argument, and when he felt desperate, he threatened to harm himself. In 2000, Joshua met Susan Cox at a church dinner. She was kind, hardworking, and full of life, and they got married within a year. Unbeknownst to Susan, her marriage would encounter serious challenges. Initially, they lived with Joshua's father, Stephen, in Washington, and that was when things became really disturbing. Stephen began to obsess over Susan. He watched her with a camera, used a small mirror to look into the bathroom, stole her underwear from the washing machine, read her diary, and posted love songs online under a pseudonym. Finally, one day, he confessed his feelings to Susan. This conversation, which included Susan's panicked rejection, was accidentally recorded on his own camera. It became the final straw. Joshua and Susan decided to pack up and move to Utah, hoping to forget about Stephen. For a while, life seemed to stabilize for Joshua and Susan, who had 2 sons named Charlie and Braden. They relocated to West Valley City, Utah, in search of a fresh start. However, Susan felt increasingly suffocated in her marriage. Her friends noticed her unhappiness and learned that Joshua hardly showed her any affection, creating a sense of distance between them. By the summer of 2008, their situation had deteriorated significantly. Joshua and Susan argued constantly, even in front of their children. Joshua had become extremely controlling, making all the decisions and leaving Susan feeling trapped. Their marriage was not just struggling, it was falling apart. He took complete control of their finances, forcing Susan to rely on him for even minor expenses. He reduced their grocery budget, refused to buy her new clothes, and required her to justify every dollar she spent. While he guarded their bank accounts, he had no issue spending money on himself, wasting thousands while Susan struggled to afford basic necessities. The issue extended to their vehicles as well. Although they owned 2 cars, Joshua claimed the family car as his own. Instead of allowing Susan to drive to work, he made her ride a bike, regardless of the weather or her fatigue. Moreover, he started to distance himself from their shared faith. Although they had been active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joshua began refusing to attend services with Susan and their sons. He mocked her beliefs, made excuses to avoid church, and discouraged her involvement. The most painful betrayal came when Joshua refused to sever ties with his father, Stephen, despite Susan's insistence that he was dangerous and unwelcome in their lives. Joshua ignored her concerns, continued to communicate with his father, and allowed their young children to maintain contact with him. By 2007, Joshua had accumulated over $200,000 in debt, adding to their marital strain as Susan recognized that their situation was worsening. In response, she began documenting everything. In 2008, Susan created a video documenting the damage in her home, which she attributed to Joshua. That same year, she wrote a secret will ominously stating that if she were to die, it might not be an accident, even if it appeared to be one. Just a year later, she disappeared without a trace. On December 6, 2009, everything seemed normal. That morning, Susan, Charlie, and Braden went to church as usual. Susan interacted with friends and tended to her boys, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. After church, a neighbor visited the family and spent some time with them before leaving. No one could have predicted that this would be the last time anyone would see Susan. The following morning, December 7th, something felt off. Susan didn't show up for work and hadn't called in sick or requested a day off. At the same time, the boys' nanny noticed that Joshua hadn't dropped them off, which was unusual for him. Concerned, she tried to contact the family, but no one answered. As hours went by without any word from Susan or Joshua, worry turned to fear. Joshua's mother, Terica, and his sister, Jennifer, learned about the situation and rushed to the house. When they arrived, they found the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and no one inside. The unsettling silence heightened their anxiety. They knocked and called out, but received no response. In a state of panic, they called the police. Officers arrived and forced entry into the home, fearing that the family might have been victims of carbon monoxide poisoning or faced another emergency. What the officers discovered inside the house was deeply concerning. Although the house was empty, something felt wrong. Susan's purse, wallet, and identification were still there, untouched. Her cell phone was later found in the family's only car, a Chrysler Town and Country minivan that Joshua had been using. It was turned off. There were no signs of a struggle, but one detail stood out. 2 box fans were set up in the living room, blowing air directly onto a damp spot on the couch. This unusual detail felt unsettling. Hours later, around 5 p.m., Joshua returned home with his sons, Charlie and Braden. The police quickly brought him in for questioning. His explanation was strange. He claimed that after midnight on December 7th, he took his 2 young sons, ages 4 and 2, on a spontaneous camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in western Utah, a remote area characterized by snow and freezing temperatures. He mentioned that Susan stayed home to sleep. His story raised many questions. Who would take toddlers on an impromptu camping trip in sub-freezing weather in the middle of the night, especially when they had work and daycare to prepare for in just a few hours? Police found it suspicious that Joshua had not notified his boss about not coming to work that day. When asked why, he gave a puzzling answer. He claimed he had lost track of the days and thought it was Sunday instead of Monday. Investigators aimed to confirm his story by sending a team to the area where he claimed to have camped. However, they found no evidence to support his claim, no tire tracks in the snow, no footprints, no fire pit, nothing. It was as if he had never gone on that trip. Things took an even stranger turn. On December 8th, after a second police interview, Joshua suddenly rented a car from Salt Lake City International Airport and then disappeared for nearly 18 hours. His whereabouts during that time remain unknown. When he finally reappeared, he called his mother from Interstate 84 in Tremonton, Utah, sounding disoriented and giving vague answers about his location. Later, he told his sister Jennifer that he had been driving around the city aimlessly, randomly getting on and off different freeways. When police examined the rental car, they found that he had added 87 miles to the odometer. Where did he go? What was he doing? No one knows, but it was becoming increasingly evident that Joshua was concealing something. 2 days after Susan went missing, the police conducted another search of her home. This time, they found something concerning on the floor, traces of Susan's blood. While it wasn't a large amount, it was enough to raise serious questions. Inside the house, they also discovered life insurance policies totaling $1.5 million and a handwritten letter from Susan. In the letter, she expressed her growing fear for her life and mentioned being terrified of Joshua. Years later, DNA tests confirmed that one blood sample belonged to Susan, while another matched an unknown male, whose identity remains unknown. As the police investigated Joshua's actions following Susan's disappearance, his behavior appeared increasingly suspicious. He emptied her retirement accounts, canceled her chiropractic appointments, and withdrew his sons from daycare, all within days of her vanishing. It seemed he was trying to erase her from their lives. Additionally, Joshua had previously talked to co-workers about how to dispose of a body in an abandoned mine shaft. At the time, people dismissed it as a strange comment, but now, it seemed more significant. As investigators worked to understand what happened to Susan, they questioned the only other witnesses present with Joshua that night, his sons. 4-year-old Charlie was interviewed, and surprisingly, he confirmed that the camping trip took place. However, his account included a significant twist. He claimed that their mother was with them. According to Charlie, Susan was in the car that night but never returned home. Weeks later, a teacher overheard Charlie make a chilling remark, stating that his mother was dead, without any details or explanations, suggesting he had come to accept this reality. Additionally, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, reported a troubling incident. At daycare, Charlie's younger brother, Braden, drew a picture of a van. When asked about it, Braden pointed to the back of the van and said, "Mommy was in the trunk." This raised further suspicions for the police, who were becoming increasingly convinced that Joshua was aware of what had happened to Susan. They intended to bring Joshua in for further questioning and requested all footage of his interviews with local news outlets. However, Joshua showed no willingness to cooperate. On December 14th, he obtained legal representation. In the following days, he became more distant and less responsive to the authorities. Just before Christmas, he gathered his sons and left Utah, returning to Puyallup, Washington, to live with his father, Stephen Powell. By December 24th, police identified him as a person of interest in the case. Sadly, the situation was far from resolved. In 2010, Joshua moved into his father's house in Puyallup, bringing his two young sons, Charlie and Braden. Joshua made it clear he wasn't returning to Utah, announcing plans to rent out their home in West Valley City. Some reports indicated he left due to losing his job, but those who knew him felt he was fleeing from something. Shortly after settling in Washington, a website called SusanPowell.org emerged. It claimed to be the official site for Susan Powell, but instead of helping to find her, it focused on defending Joshua. The site accused Susan's family, including her sister Jennifer Graves, and even the LDS Church of conducting a smear campaign against him. Some posts went so far as to suggest that Susan had fled to Brazil with another missing person, journalist Stephen Kocher, a completely unfounded theory. It didn't take long for people to suspect that Joshua and his father, Stephen, were behind the website. Then, by late 2010, the Powells made a startling claim. They suggested that Susan had been mentally ill and had intentionally abandoned her family. This seemed like a desperate attempt to change the narrative, but Susan's parents quickly rebutted it. There was no evidence to support the idea that Susan left on her own or that she was mentally unstable. While Joshua tried to portray himself as the victim, the police began focusing on his father, Stephen. A family friend revealed that Stephen had been obsessed with Susan for years. When investigators examined Stephen's computers, they discovered 4,500 images of Susan, many taken without her consent. These were not just ordinary photographs, they included disturbing close-ups of her body. Police began investigating Joshua's brother, Michael Powell, after he displayed suspicious behavior. Shortly after Susan went missing, he sold his broken Ford Taurus to a junkyard in Pendleton, Oregon. This raised eyebrows, especially when he later requested satellite images of the lot, seemingly to monitor the car. When authorities tracked it down, they used cadaver dogs, which indicated that human remains had once been in the trunk. Unfortunately, DNA tests did not yield conclusive results, leaving a key question in the case unanswered. In September 2011, police thought they had a significant lead. While searching Topaz Mountain in Utah, a location frequently visited by Joshua, they discovered what looked like a grave site. The ground appeared to have been recently disturbed and showed signs of digging. Investigators spent several days examining the area, but ultimately found no remains. Meanwhile, tensions between the Joshua families and the Susan families escalated. After police searched Stephen's home, both he and Joshua took to the media to advocate for their side of the story. Stephen claimed that he and Susan were developing a romantic relationship before her disappearance, using old journal entries from her teenage years to argue that she had always been unstable. A judge did not accept this narrative. He ruled that Stephen and Joshua could not publish any of Susan's personal writings and ordered them to return or destroy any journals they had already made public. Then the situation escalated. On September 22, the police arrested Stephen on charges of voyeurism and child abuse. Investigators found secretly recorded videos in his home featuring young girls, adult women, and, most alarmingly, Susan. It was apparent that Stephen posed a serious danger, and authorities began to suspect that Joshua might not be innocent either. John Long, Washington's Assistant Attorney General, announced that Joshua was now part of the investigation. The day after Stephen's arrest, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, filed for custody of his grandchildren, Charlie and Braden. Initially, the court granted him only temporary custody, allowing Joshua the opportunity to regain custody if he moved out of Stephen's home. Joshua rented a house in South Hill, Washington, presenting it as if he were complying with the order. However, authorities later claimed he never actually lived there. By this time, Joshua's sister, Jennifer, publicly expressed her belief that he was involved in Susan's disappearance. As the custody battle escalated, the court ordered Joshua to undergo psychological evaluations. A forensic psychologist, James Manley, evaluated Joshua and discovered concerning patterns. Joshua denied having any normal human flaws or weaknesses and displayed highly controlling behavior toward his sons. He also exhibited signs of deep paranoia, frequently blaming the police and media for his difficulties. Despite these findings, there was no direct evidence of abuse. Therefore, Manley allowed Joshua to visit his sons several times a week under the supervision of a social worker. However, in January 2012, everything changed. When examining computers seized from Joshua's home, police found about 400 images of child abuse, bestiality, and incest. The images had been cached from a previous owner, but Joshua had viewed them. Although they weren't illegal, the psychologist handling his case was deeply concerned. Joshua was ordered to undergo a full psychological evaluation and a polygraph test. As the pressure mounts, Joshua becomes desperate and is about to commit a horrific act that no one could have imagined. On February 5, 2012, social worker Elizabeth Griffin Hall pulled up to Joshua's house in South Hill, Washington, for what was supposed to be a routine supervised visit between him and his two young boys, Charlie and Braden. The court had ordered these visits to be monitored for the children's safety, so Hall was there to ensure everything went smoothly. However, the moment she arrived, something felt off. As soon as the boys reached the front door, Joshua yanked them inside and slammed it shut right in Hall's face. She barely had time to react before she heard the deadbolt click. She pounded on the door, shouting for him to open it, but he didn't respond. Panicked, she pulled out her phone and called 911. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what had just happened, that she was supposed to be supervising the visit, that Joshua had locked her out, and that she feared for the boys' safety. She begged them to send help quickly. Immediately afterwards, a terrible explosion occurred, shaking the house. The force of the explosion propelled Hall backward. Within seconds, flames erupted, engulfing the home in thick black smoke. The intense heat scorched the air around her, leaving her immobilized by fear. Neighbors rushed over, some shouting and others already calling emergency services, but it was too late. The fire spread rapidly, and there was no chance for anyone inside to escape alive. Investigators later confirmed their initial suspicions. Joshua had planned this act. It wasn't an accident or a tragic gas leak. He had doused the house in gasoline, turning it into a death trap. Officially, Charlie and Braden died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but the reality was more horrific. Joshua had attacked them with a hatchet before starting the fire. The day before the tragedy, he emptied his bank account, donated the boys' toys to charity, and sent cold, emotionless goodbye emails to family and friends. Charlie and Braden were buried beside their mother, whom they would never see again, but their family's struggle continued. A year after Joshua took the lives of his two young sons and himself, his brother Michael tragically followed suit. On February 11, 2013, he ended his own life. His ending his own life sparked even more suspicion. In 2012, police questioned him several times about his abandoned Ford Taurus, which was found at a wrecking yard in Oregon. When asked why he left it there, he was vague and did not provide clear answers. Investigators later indicated they believed both Joshua and Michael were involved in Susan's murder. Despite extensive searching, Susan's case remained unsolved and hopeless. By May 21, 2013, the West Valley City Police officially closed the investigation into her disappearance. In the same year, James Manley, the psychologist who assessed Joshua for the state of Washington, acknowledged that he had always suspected Joshua was connected to Susan's disappearance. However, he did not include these suspicions in his official report, as his role was to evaluate Joshua's parenting, not to investigate a crime. The legal dispute over Susan's estate continued for years. In March 2015, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, finally prevailed in a lengthy legal battle against Terica and Alina Powell, who had attempted to declare Susan legally dead in order to collect life insurance. As a result, Chuck gained full control of the estate. In 2019, a surprising revelation came to light. KSL, a radio station in Salt Lake City, reported on its detailed podcast about Susan's case, called Cold, that disturbing child abuse material found by West Valley City Police, which contributed to Joshua losing custody of his sons, did not actually belong to him. In fact, it wasn't even found on his computer. The explicit images were located on a second-hand computer that Susan had bought from fellow members of her LDS church. The previous owners had viewed the content, but by the time this information surfaced, it was too late to rectify the situation. The damage had already been done. In early 2022, there was one final attempt to locate Susan's remains. A team led by Dave Sparks, known from the TV show Diesel Brothers, searched a remote mine shaft in the Utah desert in hopes of bringing Susan home. They discovered rib bones, what looked like human vertebrae, and pieces of clothing, indicating that someone had died there. The remains were sent for DNA testing, but once again, there was no success. The bones did not belong to Susan, and they were not even human. A pair of pants found with the remains tested positive for male DNA, raising another question: to whom did they belong? More importantly, will Susan Powell ever be found?